I came home from a wildfire deployment 3 weeks early without telling a soul. I expected to find my 12-year-old granddaughter sleeping safely in her bed. Instead, I found a dark house and a wife who couldn't look me in the eye. When I asked where Zoe was, my wife said she sent her to the old guest cottage in Aurora to learn some manners. That cottage has been abandoned for 5 years. It has no heating. Outside, it was 4 degrees and dropping. I didn't scream, I didn't argue, I just walked into the bedroom, unlocked my safe, and took out my gun. That night, I learned that the fire I had been fighting in Oregon was nothing compared to the hell burning inside my own home. Before I tell you what I found in that freezing cottage and the secret filing cabinet that would destroy my family, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a child from the people who were supposed to love them. My name is Jeremiah Brooks, but in the fire service they called me Big J. I am 69 years old, and for 40 years I stared down walls of flame that would make the devil himself sweat. I retired 5 years ago, but when the big ones start burning in the Pacific Northwest, they still call me in as a senior consultant. I know how fire breathes, I know how it thinks, and more importantly, I know when the wind is about to change. I was driving my Ford F-150 down the interstate, the wipers fighting a losing battle against a blizzard that had come out of nowhere. I had been in Oregon for 2 months coordinating containment lines on a 300,000-acre burn. My bones ached. My lungs felt like they were coated in ash. All I wanted was to see Zoe. She is my granddaughter by blood, but she is my daughter in every way that matters. Since my son Terrence went off the rails and brought that woman Victoria into our lives, Zoe has been the only pure thing in my world. I pulled into the driveway at 11:30 at night. The house was dark. That was the first red flag. Althea, my wife of 40 years, always left the porch light on when I was away. It was a signal, a beacon to say, "Come home safe, Jeremiah." Tonight, the house looked like a tomb. I cut the engine. The silence of the snow was heavy. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked up the steps, my boots crunching on the ice. I still had my key, but the lock stuck a little frozen by the cold. I shoved the door open and stepped into the warmth of the hallway. It smelled like lavender and old dust. Althea was sitting in the living room in her rocking chair. She wasn't knitting or reading her Bible. She was just sitting there in the dark, staring at the unlit fireplace. When I flipped the light switch, she jumped like she had been shot. "Jeremiah." She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "You are early. You aren't supposed to be back for 3 weeks. I didn't like the look in her eyes. In my line of work, you learn to read fear. There is the fear of dying, which is honest and sharp. And then there is the fear of getting caught, which is shifty and desperate. Althea looked like an arsonist holding a matchbook. "I finished early," I said, dropping my bag. "Where is Zoe?" Althea stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at the floor, then at the wall, anywhere but at me. "Zoe is fine, Jeremiah. She is sleeping." I took a step toward the stairs. "Good. I will just peek in on her." No, Althea moved quickly, blocking my path. Her voice was too high, too shrill. "She is not here." I stopped. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Not here." "It is midnight, Althea. There is a blizzard outside. Where is my granddaughter?" Althea clasped her hands together in that pious way she did when she was about to judge someone. "She has been acting out, Jeremiah, being disrespectful, disobedient. She needed a lesson. She needed to learn that a young lady cannot just do whatever she wants in this house." Victoria and I decided she needed some time to reflect. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, the woman who looked at our family like we were something she scraped off her shoe. If Victoria was involved, this wasn't discipline. This was cruelty. "Where is she, Althea?" My voice was a low rumble, the kind of sound a fire makes before a backdraft. "We sent her to my mother's old cottage in Aurora," Althea said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Just for a few days. To pray and think about her attitude." My blood turned to ice. The cottage in Aurora. That place had been abandoned since Althea's mother died 5 years ago. It was basically a wooden shed in the middle of the woods. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and most importantly, it had absolutely no heating source. "You sent a 12-year-old girl to a shack in Aurora?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since the riots in '92. "Althea, do you know what the temperature is outside? It is 4 degrees. That cottage is a freezer. She has blankets," Althea said, waving her hand dismissively. "And God will keep her warm if her heart is pure. Besides, she needs to toughen up. She is too soft, just like her mother was. There it was, the venom. Althea had never forgiven Zoe for being born. Zoe wasn't Victoria's child. She was the result of a relationship Terrence had before he married his white trophy wife. Althea hated Zoe because she was a reminder that her precious son had a past. But I loved that girl. After the accident last year, after I got trapped under a burning beam and thought I was going to die, it was the thought of Zoe that made me crawl out. She saved me, and now my wife had thrown her into the snow like garbage. I looked at Althea, really looked at her. I saw the gold cross around her neck resting against her silk blouse. I saw the comfortable heated home she was standing in. And I saw a stranger, a cruel, cold stranger wearing the face of the woman I married. I didn't yell, I didn't strike her. That is what a weak man would do. I am a commander. When the fire is out of control, you don't panic. You assess, you plan, you execute. I stepped around her and walked into our bedroom. Jeremiah. "Where are you going?" Althea called out, her voice trembling now. "You can't go get her. She hasn't learned her lesson yet. Victoria said we have to be firm." I ignored her. I walked to the closet and moved the shoe rack, revealing the floor safe. My hands were steady as I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The heavy door swung open. Inside were the deeds to the land I had quietly bought over the last 20 years using the disability settlements and overtime pay Althea never knew about. 50 hectares of prime timberland that developers would kill for. There was also a stack of cash, and my service pistol, a Glock 19. I took the gun. I checked the chamber. Loaded. I tucked it into my waistband at the small of my back. I grabbed the spare set of keys to the cottage, which I kept in a small tin box. When I walked back into the living room, Althea was on the phone, whispering frantically. She hung up the second she saw me. "You are making a mistake, Jeremiah," she hissed. "Victoria isn't going to like this. Terrence isn't going to like this." I walked right up to her. I towered over her. At 6'3", I am not a small man. I looked down at this woman who claimed to be a servant of God. "Althea." I said, my voice flat and cold. "If I get to that cottage and there is a single scratch on that girl, if she is shivering, if she is scared, you better pray to your God, because Victoria and Terrence won't be able to help you. You are choosing that girl over your wife," she spat, "over your own son." I didn't answer. I just opened the front door and walked out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical blow, biting into my skin. It was freezing, lethally freezing, and my little girl was out there alone in the dark. I climbed back into my truck and slammed the door. I threw it into gear and the tires spun on the ice before catching traction. I drove faster than I should have in those conditions. But I didn't care. The drive to Aurora usually takes 40 minutes. Tonight I was going to make it in 20. As I drove, I pieced it together. This wasn't just discipline. Althea was weak, but she wasn't imaginative. This smelled like Victoria. My daughter-in-law was a shark. She came from money, or at least her family used to have money before her father ran their real estate empire into the ground with lawsuits and fraud. She looked at us and saw dollar signs. She looked at me and saw a pension check. She looked at Zoe and saw a rival. They thought I was just a retired firefighter living on a government stipend. They didn't know about the investments. They didn't know I was sitting on assets worth over $3 million. I had kept it secret to protect them, to stop exactly this kind of greed from taking root, but I had failed. But I had. The greed was there anyway. It was rotting my family from the inside out. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The snow swirled in the headlights, hypnotic and deadly. "Hold on, Zoe," I whispered to the empty cab. "Big J is coming." I remembered the last time I saw her 3 weeks ago. She had hugged me tight, her little arms barely reaching around my waist. "Come back safe, Papa," she had said. She called me Papa because Terrence was never a father to her. Terrence was a joke, a man-child who let his wife run his life. I thought about Althea's face when I walked in. She wasn't just nervous. She was hiding something specific, the way she mentioned Victoria immediately, the way she tried to physically block me from the door. This wasn't just about sending a child away. This was an operation, a coordinated strike. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text from Terrence. Dad, Mom says you are acting crazy. Don't go to Aurora. Roads are bad. We will get Zoe tomorrow. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. While his daughter froze. I didn't reply. I pressed the accelerator harder. The engine of the F-150 roared, eating up the dark road. I wasn't going to sleep. Not tonight. Not until I burned their whole world down to the ground. I saw the turnoff for the cottage ahead. The gate was closed. I didn't stop to open it. I rammed through it, the old wood shattering under the grill of my truck. I bounced down the unpaved driveway, the headlights cutting through the trees like searchlights. And then I saw it. The cottage. Dark. Desolate. Buried in snow. There were no footprints leading to the door. That meant no one had checked on her. No one had brought her food. I slammed the brakes and jumped out before the truck had even fully stopped moving. I grabbed my fire axe from the toolbox in the bed. The wind howled around me, carrying the scent of pine and ice. I ran to the door. It was locked from the outside. A heavy iron padlock and chain looped through the handles. Locked in. They hadn't just sent her here. They had imprisoned her. Zoe, I screamed, pounding on the wood. Zoe, baby, are you in there? Silence. Just the wind. I stepped back. I swung the axe. The blade bit deep into the wood near the lock. Again. Wood splintered. The metal groaned. I kicked the door with everything I had. It flew open, crashing against the interior wall. I turned on my heavy-duty flashlight and stepped inside. The cold inside was worse than outside because it was a still, stagnant cold. It smelled of mildew and damp rot. Zoe. I swept the beam across the room. Old furniture covered in sheets. Dust. And then I saw a small mound in the corner huddled under a thin, moth-eaten blanket. Zoe. I dropped the axe and fell to my knees beside her. I pulled the blanket back. She was curled up in a ball, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale like marble. She was wet. She had urinated on herself because she was too cold to move to find a bathroom. Oh, God. I scooped her up. She was light. Too light. Papa, she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. They were glassy, unfocused. Hypothermia. I got you, baby, I said, tearing off my heavy coat and wrapping it around her. I got you. She grabbed my shirt with a strength that surprised me. Her little fingers dug into my chest. Papa, she rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves. Don't let them take me back. Grandma said I have to stay until I stop breathing. Rage, pure white-hot rage exploded in my chest. This wasn't discipline. This was an execution. They left her here to die. I stood up, holding her against me, warming her with my body heat. I am taking you home, baby, I said. No, she whimpered. Not home, not to them. She started coughing, a dry, hacking cough. They talked about the insurance, Papa. Victoria said if I get sick, if I go to sleep in the cold, the money comes faster. I stopped. I stood there in the freezing dark, holding my dying granddaughter, and the pieces finally clicked into place. Insurance. They weren't just punishing her. They were liquidating an asset. We aren't going home, I told her, stepping out into the snow. I am taking you to a place where they can't touch you. I put her in the truck, cranking the heater up to maximum. As I buckled her in, she grabbed my hand again. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terror that no child should ever know. Papa, she whispered. The cabinet. What cabinet, baby? The gray one. Under the floorboards. In the cottage. I found it. I was looking for food. What about it, Zoe? Victoria hid papers there. She told Daddy. She said if you ever see what is in there, you will kill them all. I looked back at the dark cottage. The door was hanging off its hinges. I closed the truck door. I needed to get Zoe to the hospital first. But I knew one thing for sure. I was coming back tonight. I was going to find that cabinet. And if what was in there was half as bad as I thought it was, I wouldn't need the fire axe to destroy my son and his wife. I would do it with the truth. I got in the driver's seat and looked at my phone. 5 missed calls from Althea, 1 text from Victoria. Hope you are resting, Dad. Don't worry about anything. I threw the phone onto the dashboard. Resting. No, I was just getting started. The drive to Aurora was a battle against the elements that felt personal. The snow was coming down in sheets thick and blinding, turning the highway into a white tunnel of death. My Ford F-150 is a beast of a machine built for hauling heavy equipment up fire lines, but even with four-wheel drive engaged, the back end fishtailed on the black ice hiding beneath the powder. I didn't tap the brakes. I knew better. I steered into the skid, my hands loose but firm on the wheel, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure panic against my ribs. I had driven through walls of flame that turned the sky orange, but I had never been this terrified. Fire, I understood. Fire was a living thing. You could fight, you could outsmart, you could starve. But this cold, this silent, relentless cold, was an assassin. I pushed the truck to 70 miles an hour, ignoring the speed limit and the visibility that dropped to near zero. Every minute I spent on this road was a minute the cold was seeping into Zoe's bones. I checked the dashboard thermometer. It read 3 degrees. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Althea had sent a child out in this. My wife, the woman who led the church choir, who quoted scripture at the dinner table, had sentenced a 12-year-old girl to freeze to death in the name of discipline. I saw the turnoff for the old logging road that led to the cottage. The gate was rusted shut, a chain looped around the post. I didn't have time for keys. I didn't have time for finesse. I shifted into low gear and punched the gas. The truck roared and the heavy steel bumper slammed into the gate. Metal shrieked and wood splintered as the gate gave way, flying open into the snow. I bounced down the unpaved track, the headlights cutting through the darkness, revealing the twisted shapes of naked trees that looked like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. And then I saw it. The cottage. It looked like a tombstone jutting out of the snow. Dark, silent, dead. There was no smoke coming from the chimney because the chimney had been blocked for years. There was no light in the windows. It was a wooden box designed to trap the cold. I skidded to a halt, the truck sliding sideways before crunching into a snowbank. I didn't even turn off the engine. I needed that heater running. I needed that warmth ready. I jumped out into the biting wind, the cold instantly stinging my face like 1,000 needles. I reached into the truck bed and grabbed my Pulaski axe, the heavy firefighting tool with an axe blade on one side and an adze on the other. It had cleared brush and cut fire lines for 20 years. Tonight it was going to cut through my family's lies. I ran to the door, slipping on the ice but catching myself. The heavy iron padlock on the outside was coated in frost. It was a master lock, the kind you use to secure a storage unit, not a home. They hadn't just sent her here. They had locked her in like an animal. They had made sure she couldn't leave even if she wanted to. "Zoe," I screamed, my voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Baby, are you in there?" Silence. Just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I stepped back, planting my feet in the snow. I raised the axe over my shoulder. I didn't aim for the lock. I aimed for the wood of the door frame where the hasp was screwed in. I brought the axe down with every ounce of rage and fear in my body. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet night. The blade bit deep into the old oak door, sending splinters flying into my face. I didn't blink. I pulled it free and swung again. And again. The wood groaned and shattered. The metal hasp twisted. One final kick with my heavy boot, and the door flew inward, banging against the wall with a hollow thud. I clicked on my heavy-duty tactical flashlight and stepped into the abyss. The air inside was colder than the air outside. It was a stagnant, heavy cold that smelled of rot and damp earth. The beam of my light cut through the dust motes dancing in the freezing air. Zoe. I swept the light across the single room. I saw old furniture draped in sheets that looked like ghosts. I saw a table with a layer of dust so thick you could write your name in it. And then in the far corner, curled up on a bare mattress that had been dragged onto the floor, I saw a small lump under a thin moth-eaten blanket. My heart stopped. For a second, I was back in the forest, standing over a fellow firefighter who hadn't made it to the shelter in time. That same stillness. That same terrifying silence. I dropped the axe on the floor, the metal clanging loudly. I ran to the mattress and fell to my knees. The smell hit me then. It was sharp and unmistakable. Urine. Fresh urine mixed with the stale odor of the old mattress. She had wet herself because she was too cold to move, too frozen to get up. I pulled the blanket back. Zoe was curled into a tight fetal ball, her knees pressed against her chest, her hands tucked under her chin. Her skin was the color of marble, pale and blue-tinged. Her lips were a dark purple. There was frost on her eyelashes. "Zoe, baby, wake up." I touched her cheek. It was like touching ice. She didn't move. She didn't even shiver. That was the worst sign. When the shivering stops, it means the body has given up. It means the fire is going out. No, 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 no. I ripped off my heavy down parka. I was wearing thermal layers underneath, but the cold bit into me instantly. I didn't care. I wrapped the coat around her small, fragile body, lifting her up. She was dead weight, her head lolled back against my arm, her eyes half open but seeing nothing glassy and vacant. I pressed my ear to her chest. It was faint, a slow, thready rhythm like a bird dying in the snow, but it was there. Thump, thump, thump. She was alive. Barely. I gathered her into my arms, holding her tight against my chest, trying to push my own body heat into her. I stood up, and the rage that flooded my system was so intense it almost blinded me. I looked around this prison, this torture chamber. I saw a bucket in the corner with frozen water in it. They hadn't even given her running water. I saw a plate with a half-eaten apple that had frozen solid. This wasn't punishment. This was an execution. Slow and painful. I looked down at her face. My beautiful, smart, funny Zoe, who wanted to be an astronaut, who loved jazz music, who made me laugh when I was too tired to smile. They had done this to her. Althea, Terrence, Victoria. They had looked at this child and decided she was disposable. I carried her out of that hellhole, my boots stomping through the snow. I didn't look back. I wanted to burn that cottage to the ground right then and there, but I had a life to save first. I got to the truck and wrenched the passenger door open. The cabin was blasting hot air, a tropical oasis in the middle of the Arctic. I laid her in the seat, reclining it back. I buckled her in, putting the seatbelt over my massive coat that swallowed her small frame. I ran around to the driver's side and jumped in, slamming the door and locking it as if the cold tried to follow us inside. I put the truck in gear and spun the tires, getting us out of there. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on Zoe's arm, rubbing it gently, trying to stimulate circulation. "Zoe, baby, stay with me. Big J is here. Papa is here." Her eyelids fluttered. A small sound escaped her throat, a dry, raspy croak. "Papa." "Yes, baby. It is me. You are safe." Her head turned slowly toward me. Her eyes were struggling to focus. She looked like she was looking through me, not at me. "Grandma said..." Her voice was a whisper, a ghost of a sound. She said God hates disobedient girls. She said I had to stay until the cold purified me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. Purified. That was Althea's word. That was the language of a fanatic. "You are not disobedient, Zoe. You are perfect. Grandma was wrong. Grandma is sick." Zoe coughed, a dry, hacking sound that rattled in her chest. She took my coat, Papa. She said I didn't need it if I had faith. And Mom, Victoria," she laughed. "She said the cold would make me quiet, make her quiet. My daughter-in-law wanted to silence a child. Why? Because Zoe was smart. Because Zoe saw things. Because Zoe was the only one in that house who wasn't part of their twisted game. We were back on the highway now, the truck eating up the miles. I wasn't going home. If I took her home, I would kill them. I would walk in there and I would end them with my bare hands, and then I would go to prison and Zoe would have no one. I needed to be smart. I needed to be the commander. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't 911. If I called the police now, social services would get involved. They would put Zoe in foster care pending an investigation. I couldn't lose her to the system. I needed someone I could trust with my life. Dr. Marcus Vance. He was the chief of staff at St. Jude's private hospital and my best friend since Vietnam. He answered on the second ring. "Jay, it is midnight. Is everything okay?" "Marcus, I need you to open the private bay." "I am coming in hot. What happened, Jay? Are you hurt?" "It is Zoe. Severe hypothermia, possible dehydration. And Marcus..." I paused, looking at the bruised shadows under Zoe's eyes that I could see now in the passing streetlights. "I think there is evidence of prior trauma. Old breaks, bruises." There was a silence on the line. Then Marcus's voice came back hard and professional. "How far out are you?" 20 minutes. Bring her to the back entrance. I will have a trauma team waiting. No paperwork yet. Just get her here." I hung up. Zoe was stirring again. She reached out a trembling hand and grabbed my sleeve. Her grip was surprisingly strong, born of terror. Papa, wait. I am here, baby. We are going to see Dr. Marcus. No. You have to listen. Her eyes were wide now, staring at the dashboard with a frantic intensity. The cottage. Under the floor. What about the cottage, Zoe? I was hungry. I was looking for food. I pulled up the loose board under the rug. There was a box, a gray metal box. A filing cabinet, a lockbox. Victoria put it there. I saw her hide it last summer. She told Daddy, she said, Terrence, if your father ever sees what is inside this box, he will kill us all. You have to promise never to look. My stomach dropped. Victoria hid something from me, something so dangerous she knew it would drive a wedge between us forever. What was in it, Zoe? Did you open it? She nodded her head, lolling against the seat. Papers. Lots of papers, and a big blue folder with my name on it. It had numbers, lots of zeros. Insurance. My mind raced. Life insurance. But you can't take out a policy on a child without the guardian's consent, unless they forged my signature, unless they had been planning this for a long time. Papa, Zoe whispered, her voice fading as exhaustion took over. Don't go back there. They will hurt you too. I smoothed the hair back from her frozen forehead. Don't worry about me, baby. They took their shot. Now it is my turn. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The lights of the city appeared on the horizon, glowing like embers. I was bringing my girl to safety. And then I was going back into the cold. I was going to find that gray box. I was going to read every single page. And if my son and his wife had done what I thought they had done, I was going to use those papers to bury them so deep they would never see the sun again. I checked my rearview mirror. No one was following me. They were all asleep in my warm house, dreaming of the money they would get when Zoe froze to death. They thought they had won. They thought the old firefighter was just a senile old man they could manipulate. They forgot one thing. You never turn your back on a fire until you are sure it is out. And I was burning hotter than I ever had in my life. St. Jude's private hospital was a fortress of glass and steel rising out of the snowstorm like a beacon. I pulled the truck into the ambulance bay where the lights were bright enough to hurt my eyes. Dr. Marcus Vance was waiting for us by the sliding doors, his breath puffing in the freezing air. He didn't ask questions. He didn't waste time. He just motioned for the orderlies to take Zoe from my arms. Seeing her small body on that gurney surrounded by a flurry of medical activity broke something inside me that I didn't think could ever be fixed. I stood there in my snowy boots, dripping water onto the pristine floor, feeling like a man who had failed his only mission. Marcus led me to a private waiting room away from the prying eyes of the main ER. He handed me a cup of black coffee. His hands were steady, but his eyes were hard. He had been a combat medic in Vietnam before he was a chief of staff. He had seen the worst of humanity, and he knew exactly what he was looking at now. Jay, you need to see this, he said, gesturing to the digital light board on the wall. He pulled up Zoe's x-rays. The skeletal images glowed blue and white ghost pictures of my little girl's frame. Marcus pointed to a jagged line on her left rib cage. This is a fracture of the 6th and 7th ribs, he said, his voice clinically detached but tight with anger. The calcification suggests it happened about 3 months ago. It healed poorly, Jay. It was never set. I stared at the image. 3 months ago. I was home 3 months ago. I was sitting at the dinner table eating Althea's pot roast, listening to Terrence talk about his golf game. Zoe had been quiet that week, spending a lot of time in her room. Victoria had told me she fell off her bike. I believed her. I just nodded and told Zoe to be more careful. I didn't check. I didn't look. Marcus swiped the screen. Here is the right ulna, green stick fracture, defensive wound. That is about 6 weeks old. And here on the tibia, a hairline fracture. He turned to face me, crossing his arms. This isn't just hypothermia, Jay. This is systematic abuse. Someone has been hurting her for a long time, and someone else has been covering it up. The coffee cup in my hand cracked. Hot liquid spilled over my fingers, but I didn't feel it. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. It was the coldness of realization. I had prided myself on being the protector. The big J who kept the fire line, held the crew together, saved the forest. But in my own house, under my own roof, I had been blind. I had let my guard down because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale of a happy retirement. I wanted to believe that Althea was a good grandmother. I wanted to believe that Terrence was just struggling, not malicious. I trusted them, Marcus. I whispered, my voice sounding like gravel. I left her with them. I went to Oregon to chase a paycheck to buy more land for her future, and I left her in a cage with wolves. You didn't know, Marcus said, putting a hand on my shoulder. But you know now. What are you going to do? I looked at the door where the nurses were working to warm Zoe's blood. I am going to finish it, I said. Keep her safe, Marcus. Put a guard on the door. If my wife or my son shows up, they do not get in. Do you understand? Consider it done, Marcus said. I walked out of the hospital and back into the storm. The wind was howling louder now, a banshee scream tearing through the city streets. I got into my truck and turned it back toward Aurora. I wasn't done with that cottage. Zoe had told me about a gray box, a secret. If my family was willing to break a child's bones, I needed to know exactly what else they were willing to do. The drive back was a blur of white snow and red rage. I drove by instinct, my mind replaying every interaction of the last year. Every time Zoe flinched when Victoria raised her hand. Every time Althea sent Zoe to her room for being loud. Every time Terrence looked away when his wife made a cruel comment. The signs were there. They were always there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I reached the cottage. The door was still hanging off its hinges from my earlier assault, swinging, banging rhythmically against the frame like a broken heartbeat. I stepped inside the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The smell of urine and mildew was still thick in the air. I went straight to the corner Zoe had described. Under the moth-eaten rug beneath the window, there was a loose floorboard. I jammed the tip of my boot into the gap and pried it up. The wood groaned and snapped. There it was, a gray metal fireproof lockbox. It was heavy cold to the touch. It had a key lock, but I didn't have time for keys. I went out to the truck and grabbed a crowbar. I wedged the tip into the seam of the box and leaned my weight into it. Metal screeched. The lock popped with a sharp crack. I threw the lid open. Inside were neat stacks of paperwork protected from the damp by plastic sleeves. Victoria was organized. I had to give her that. She was a meticulous monster. I pulled out the first file. It was a thick blue folder with the logo of Paramount Life Assurance. I opened it and the numbers jumped out at me like embers. Juvenile life insurance policy. Insured Zoe Brooks. Age 12. Benefit amount $2 million. I flipped to the beneficiaries page. Primary beneficiary Terrence Brooks. Secondary beneficiary Victoria Brooks. I scanned the clauses. There were riders for accidental death. There were specific mentions of environmental exposure and tragic accidents. They had taken this policy out 6 months ago, right around the time they started pressuring me to sell the timberland. They had bet against my granddaughter's life. They were paying premiums on her death. My hand shook as I turned the page. Underneath the policy was a legal document, Affidavit of Voluntary Relinquishment of Guardianship. I read the first paragraph and bile rose in my throat. It stated that I, Jeremiah Brooks, being of sound mind but declining physical health, hereby voluntarily surrendered all custodial rights of Zoe Brooks to my son Terrence. It claimed I was suffering from early onset dementia. It claimed I was unable to care for a minor. And at the bottom there was a signature, Jeremiah Brooks. It was a good forgery. They had practiced. But the loop on the J was too wide. My J is tight sharp like a hook. This was lazy. But to a judge who didn't know me, it would pass. They planned to file this the moment Zoe was dead. They would claim I signed it weeks ago. They would claim I was senile, that I had forgotten I signed it. They would use my own name to wash their hands of her murder. There was one more thing in the box, a small black notebook. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Victoria's. She used to write thank you notes in this same looping script. I opened it to a marked page. It was a timeline. Week 1, isolate the girl. Cut off contact with friends. Week 2, reduce food intake. Weakness makes them compliant. Week 3, the incident. Wait for a storm. Make it look like she ran away. Hypothermia is quick and clean. No marks. Week 4, file the claim. Dad will be too broken to fight. We tell him it was his fault for not being there. She had written it down. She had scheduled the murder of a child like she was planning a dinner party. I dropped the notebook back into the box. I sat down on the freezing floor, the documents scattered around me like ashes. I reached into the waistband of my pants and pulled out my Glock 19. The metal was cold against my palm. The weight of it was familiar. I could do it. I knew I could. I could drive home right now. I could walk into the master bedroom where Althea was sleeping, probably dreaming of her new kitchen. I could walk into the guest room where Terrence and Victoria were staying. I could put 2 rounds in each of them. It would be easy, it would be justice. The world would be a cleaner place without them in it. I thumbed the safety off. Click. I closed my eyes and imagined it. The noise, the blood, the finality. But then I thought of Zoe. I thought of her waking up in that hospital bed scared and alone. If I killed them, I would go to prison for the rest of my life. Zoe would go into the system. She would be an orphan with a murderer for a grandfather. She would never heal. She would never be safe. And killing them was too quick. It was too merciful. They didn't deserve a quick end. They deserved to suffer. They deserved to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. They deserved to feel the panic of losing everything they held dear. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. They wanted my money. They wanted my land. They wanted the insurance payout. They were hungry for it. They were starving for it. I looked at the insurance policy again. $2 million. That was the bait. That was the fuel for their fire. If you want to kill a fire, you don't just spray water on it. You cut a line, you starve it of oxygen, you let it burn itself out until there is nothing left but ash. I clicked the safety back on. I put the gun away. I took my phone out of my pocket. I photographed every single page of the documents, the policy, the forgery, the journal entries. I made sure the flash caught the signatures and the dates. I uploaded them to my secure cloud storage immediately. Then I did something that hurt, but was necessary. I put the papers back in the plastic sleeves. I put them back in the gray box. I locked it. I put it back under the floorboard and stamped the wood down until it looked undisturbed. I couldn't let them know I had found it. Not yet. If they knew I had the evidence, they would run. Or worse, they would try to kill me before I could use it. I needed them to think they were safe. I needed them to think their plan was working. They expected a senile old man. They expected a confused grandfather who had lost his mind with grief. Fine. I would give them what they wanted. I would play the part. I would be the stumbling, broken old fool. I would let them think they had me wrapped around their fingers. I would let them get close. I would let them think the money was within their grasp. And when they reached for it, I would close the trap. I stood up, brushing the dust from my pants. The cottage was silent, but the wind outside was screaming. It sounded like a warning. I walked out to my truck. I was exhausted. My body was screaming for rest, but my mind was sharp, clear, and cold as the ice under my tires. I wasn't Big J, the firefighter, anymore. I was Jeremiah Brooks, the father who had just realized he raised a monster, and I was going home to look that monster in the eye and smile. I checked my watch. 5 a.m. The sun would be up soon. It was time to go home. It was time to start the performance of a lifetime. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the cottage, leaving the broken door swinging in the wind. Let them find it later. Let them wonder who broke in. Let them panic. Fear makes people make mistakes, and I would be there waiting to catch every single one. The drive back to the main house was the longest 5 miles of my life. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. The sun was just starting to bleed over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gray and bruised purple. I pulled my truck into the driveway, moving slowly, deliberately, letting the tires crunch loudly on the gravel. I parked crooked, taking up 2 spaces, something I never did. Big J. Brooks was a man of precision. Jeremiah, the senile old fool, however, didn't care about parking lines. I sat in the cab for a moment, staring at the house. It looked peaceful. Smoke was curling from the chimney. The windows were dark. It looked like a home. But I knew better. It was a snake pit. And I was about to walk in barefoot. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed from the drive and the lack of sleep. My stubble was gray and rough. I didn't have to try hard to look tired. I was tired. My bones ached from carrying Zoe. My heart ached from the betrayal. But I needed more than tired. I needed confused. I needed broken. I slumped my shoulders forward, curving my spine to lose 2 inches of height. I let my mouth hang slightly open. I relaxed the muscles in my face, erasing the commander, erasing the man who shouted orders over the roar of a wildfire. I summoned every bit of grief and confusion I could find. I got out of the truck, leaving the door unlocked. I shuffled to the front door, my steps heavy and dragging. I didn't use my key. I rattled the handle loudly, then knocked, fumbling with the knob as if I couldn't remember how it worked. I wanted to wake them up. I wanted to see them panic. The door swung open. It wasn't Althea. Wasn't. It was Terrence, my son. He was wearing his silk pajamas, looking like he had just been shaken awake. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Behind him, Althea stood in the hallway, clutching her robe, her face the color of old ash. Dad Terrence stammered, "You are back. We saw your truck leave. Where did you go?" I looked past him, blinking slowly as if the hallway light hurt my eyes. I stepped inside, tracking snow onto the hardwood floor without wiping my boots. "Did I leave?" I asked, my voice raspy and thin. I thought I was sleeping. I had a dream, Terry. A bad dream about the cold. I woke up and I was driving. I don't remember driving. I saw the look Terrence exchanged with Althea. It was a look of relief. They thought I was losing time. They thought the dementia they were inventing was actually happening. Althea rushed forward, taking my arm. Her hands were shaking. "Oh, Jeremiah," she said, her voice thick with fake concern. "You poor thing. You must be exhausted. Come sit down. I will make coffee." She guided me to the kitchen table. I let her lead me. I sat down heavily, letting my hands rest on the table. They were trembling. That part wasn't acting. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to reach across the table and strangle the woman who had left a child to freeze. I looked around the kitchen. It was warm. It smelled of cinnamon and coffee. It was a lie. "Where is Zoe?" I asked, looking around the room with wide, confused eyes. "Is she up for school? I brought her a pine cone from Oregon, a big one." The air left the room. Victoria walked in then. My daughter-in-law. She was fully dressed in sharp black slacks and a cream blouse, looking like she was ready for a board meeting at 6 in the morning. She didn't look tired. She looked dangerous. She walked straight to the coffee pot, pouring herself a cup without looking at me. "Good morning, Dad," she said, her voice cool and crisp. "You are confused again. Don't you remember? Zoe isn't here." I frowned, knitting my brows together. Not here. But I saw her. In my dream. She was cold. She was calling me. Victoria laughed, a short, sharp sound that sounded like glass breaking. "Dreams aren't real, Dad. Zoe is fine. She is..." She paused, taking a sip of coffee, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the cup. "She is staying with a friend. In the city. She has been acting out lately, Dad. Skipping school. Talking back. Boys. You know how girls get at that age. She needed some space. Boys. Zoe was 12. She still slept with a stuffed bear. She collected rocks. She didn't care about boys. Ran away." I mumbled, staring at my hands. "She ran away. No one said ran away." "Dad," Victoria corrected me, her tone condescending like she was talking to a toddler. "I said she is visiting a friend. We are handling it. You don't need to worry your head about it. You just focus on resting. You seem very... fragile." Terrence sat down across from me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his coffee cup, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "Yeah," Dad, Terrence said softly. "Just relax. We got everything under control. Mom said you were acting strange last night, talking about going to the cottage. You didn't go out there, did you? The trap was set. They were fishing. They wanted to know if I had seen the empty prison." I looked at Terrence. I let my jaw go slack. "Cottage. No. Why would I go there? It is cold. I hate the cold. I just drove. I drove around. I got lost, Terry. I didn't know where I was." Althea let out a sob, a theatrical, overacted sob. "Oh, Jeremiah. My poor husband. It is happening, isn't it? The forgetting. It was sickening. But it was working. They bought it. They believed the lion had lost his teeth." I sat there sipping the coffee Althea placed in front of me. It tasted bitter. I wondered if she had put something in it already. I didn't drink anymore. I just held the mug, letting the warmth seep into my hands. Victoria sat down next to Terrence. She placed her hand on the table. And that is when I saw it. On her left wrist, gleaming under the kitchen lights, was my gold Rolex. It wasn't just a watch. It was a retirement gift from the department. 40 years of service. 40 years of breathing smoke and saving lives engraved on the back. I kept it in the safe. The safe in my bedroom. She had been in my safe. She had gone through my things while I was gone. The rage flared up hot and bright in my chest, a sudden flashover. I wanted to grab her wrist and snap it. I wanted to demand she take it off, but I stopped myself. Big J, the commander, would have broken her arm. Jeremiah, the confused old man, had to do something else. I reached out and touched the watch, my rough fingers brushing against the cold gold. Victoria flinched, pulling her hand back slightly, but I held on. "That is pretty," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "So shiny. It looks like one I used to have, but mine was for men. That looks good on you, dear. Very classy." Victoria froze. She looked at Terrence, then back at me. She was waiting for the accusation. She was waiting for me to scream thief. Instead, I patted her hand and let go. "You keep it," I said. "It suits you. I don't need fancy things anymore. I just lose them. Like I lose my keys. Like I lose my way home." Victoria's shoulders dropped. She smiled a genuine shark-like smile. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought I was so far gone I didn't even recognize my own property. "Thank you, Dad," she said, smoothing her hair. "You are right. It is a bit heavy for you now anyway." I reached into the inner pocket of my flannel shirt. I pulled out a thick white envelope. It was bulging. I saw their eyes snap to it. Greedy. Hungry. I almost forgot I said, my voice trembling slightly. I stopped at the bank in Oregon before I left. They gave me a bonus, hazard pay they called it, for the big fire near the ridge. I slid the envelope across the table toward Terrence. "It is $5,000, I whispered, as if it were a secret. "Cash. I don't want to put it in the bank. The bank steals your money, Terry. I read that in the paper. You take it. You keep it safe for the family. Buy something nice for Zoe when she gets back from her friend's house." Terrence stared at the envelope. He licked his lips. He reached out his hand, shaking more than mine, and took it. He didn't even open it to count it. He just felt the thickness of the stack. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice breathless. "I will keep it safe. Don't you worry." I saw Victoria's eyes light up. She looked at Terrence, then at the money, then at me. The contempt in her eyes was replaced by a predatory hunger. They didn't see a father. They saw an ATM that was malfunctioning and spitting out cash. "You are a good boy, Terry," I said, standing up slowly, gripping the table for support. I am tired now. The driving, it made my head spin. "I am going to go lie down." "Of course, Jeremiah," Althea said, rushing to help me. "You go rest. We will handle everything." I shuffled toward the stairs, leaving them in the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I heard the envelope rip open. I heard the rustle of bills. "He is totally gone," Victoria whispered, her voice low and excited. "Did you see that? He didn't even know he gave me the watch. And $5 grand, just like that." "We need to move up the timeline," Terrence hissed. "If he is walking around with that kind of cash, he is going to lose it or give it to a stranger. We need that power of attorney now." "Let him sleep," Althea said. "When he wakes up, we will start the new medication. It will help him relax." I walked up the stairs, one heavy step at a time. My heart was pounding a war drum against my ribs. They thought I was giving up. They thought I was fading away. They didn't know that the $5,000 was just the bait. I had just chummed the water. And the sharks were circling. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I needed them to feel welcome to come in. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I stared at the ceiling. "Enjoy the money, son," I thought. "Enjoy the watch, Victoria. Because it is the last thing you are ever going to get from me." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I listened. I waited. And I prepared for the fire that was about to consume us all. They left the house just after noon. Terrence and Victoria were practically vibrating with the urge to spend that $5,000 I had thrown on the table like raw meat to starving wolves. Althea went with them, probably to carry their bags and pay for their lunch with whatever dignity she had left. The moment the taillights of Terrence's leased BMW disappeared around the bend of the driveway, I stopped being the stumbling old man. I stood up straight, stretching my spine until I felt the vertebrae crack. My exhaustion was heavy like a wet turnout coat, but my adrenaline was hotter. I went to the garage to my locked equipment locker. It was a heavy steel cabinet where I kept the gear I used for independent consulting. I pulled out a black waterproof Pelican case. Inside, nestled in custom foam, were my eyes and ears. These weren't cheap nanny cams you buy at the electronics store. These were high-definition micro-surveillance units we used to monitor fire behavior in remote canyons and catch arsonists in the act. They were heat-resistant, waterproof, and smaller than a quarter, with battery lives that could last weeks. I moved through the house with the efficiency of a man who had spent 40 years laying lines before the fire hit. I didn't waste a step. I put the first camera in the kitchen, hidden in the intricate ironwork of the pot rack hanging above the island. It had a perfect view of the table and the stove. I put the second one in the living room, tucked between the spines of the leather-bound encyclopedias on the shelf Althea never touched because she said they gathered too much dust. The third one went into the guest bedroom where Victoria and Terence were sleeping. I slid it into the casing of the smoke detector on the ceiling. I felt a grim satisfaction doing that. A smoke detector watching the real hazard in the house. I wired the feeds to a secure server on my laptop in my home office. This room was my sanctuary, the one place in the house Victoria hadn't invaded yet, probably because it smelled of old wood smoke and hard work. I sat in my leather chair and opened the laptop. The screens flickered to life. Crystal clear, high definition. I adjusted the audio gain. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I could hear the house settling in the wind. I was ready. This was my command post now. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the incident commander, and the fire was already inside the structure. They came back 3 hours later. I heard the car doors slam and the sound of laughter carrying up the stairs. It was the sound of people who thought they had won the lottery, arrogant and loud. I quickly dimmed my laptop screen and put on my noise-canceling headphones, syncing them to the live feed. I swiveled my chair away from the door, feigning sleep just in case anyone checked on me, but my eyes were glued to the monitors. The kitchen feed flickered. They were walking and dumping shopping bags onto the counters. Designer clothes, expensive liquor, a new handbag for Victoria that probably cost more than my first car. They had burned through that $5,000 in 3 hours. Victoria sat at the head of the table filing her nails while Althea unloaded the groceries. The dynamic had shifted completely. When I was around, Althea played the matriarch, the respected mother. But here in the privacy of the kitchen, she was a servant. Victoria looked up from her nails, her face twisting into a sneer that made her look ugly despite her expensive makeup. "Mother Althea," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "did you buy that cheap ground beef again? I told you Terence only eats Wagyu, or at least prime. This grease is disgusting." Althea flinched like a whipped dog. She clutched the package of meat to her chest. "I am sorry, Victoria. It was on sale. I thought I could make a meatloaf. Jeremiah likes meatloaf." Victoria laughed, a short, sharp barking sound. "Meatloaf. That is peasant food. God, you people, and your heavy, greasy food. No wonder Terence has high cholesterol. We are not eating slop just because the old man likes it. Cook something decent or order out. And don't use that stinking lard." Althea didn't argue. She didn't defend her cooking or her heritage. She just nodded her head, bowing low. "Yes, Victoria. I will make a salad. I will throw this out." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Forget the salad. Focus on the land." My father called again. "He is losing patience. He needs that 50 hectares Jeremiah is sitting on. His resort project is stalled without it. We need that deed signed by Friday or the investors walk. And if the investors walk, Terence and I are finished. And if we are finished, you are finished, Althea." Althea stopped unpacking. She wiped her hands on her apron, looking nervously at the ceiling as if she could see through the floorboards to where I was sitting. "I am working on it," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I doubled the dose in his coffee this morning. I crushed the pills right into the grounds." He was stumbling when he went upstairs. "Did you see his eyes? He is glassy." Victoria smiled. "Good. Make sure he stays sedated. We can't have him waking up and asking about the brat. Speaking of the brat, did you get rid of her things? We can't have reminders lying around when the police eventually come to take a report about a runaway." Althea nodded. "I put her clothes in the incinerator out back this morning before Jeremiah woke up. Ashes to ashes, just like she never existed. I saved her shoes, though, to leave by the river later, to make it look like an accident." I took the headphones off, slowly setting them on the desk. My hands were trembling, but not from age and not from fear. I looked at the mug of coffee Althea had brought me right before she left. It was sitting on the corner of my desk, cold and dark, a black pool of betrayal. I had thought Althea was weak. I had told myself stories to protect my own heart. I told myself she was scared, that she was being bullied by Victoria, that she was a victim of a domineering daughter-in-law. I wanted to believe that 40 years of marriage meant something. I wanted to believe that the woman I held at night wasn't capable of evil. But I was wrong. The camera didn't lie. The audio didn't lie. Althea wasn't a victim, she was a collaborator. She was poisoning me not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She was proactive about it. She crushed the pills, she burned Zoe's clothes, she planned to plant evidence by the river. She hated Zoe. She hated her because Zoe was proof that her precious Terrence wasn't perfect. And she was willing to kill me slowly, day by day, dose by dose, to get that land deal for a woman who treated her like dirt. I picked up the mug. I walked over to the large potted fern in the corner of the office. The plant had been a gift from Zoe for my birthday. I poured the dark liquid into the soil. The earth drank it up. I watched it disappear, just like my trust in the woman I had shared a life with. It was gone, evaporated. I wasn't married to Althea Brooks anymore. I was married to a stranger who would trade my life for a pat on the head from Victoria. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It is the calm you feel when the fire jumps the line and there is no saving the structure. You stop trying to save it. You stop negotiating. You just focus on survival. You focus on the counterburn. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the screen where my wife was chopping vegetables for a woman who despised her. I wasn't going to save her. I wasn't going to spare her. She had made her choice. She had chosen the poison. Now she was going to have to drink it. The fire line had been crossed, and I was about to light the match. I waited until the sun was fully up before I made my move down the stairs. I had spent the last hour practicing in the mirror, perfecting the vacant stare of a man whose mind was slipping away like smoke through a ventilation shaft. I let my jaw go slack and allowed a slight tremor to take hold of my left hand. I wasn't Big J, the commander who could bark orders over the roar of a crown fire anymore. I was Jeremiah, the burden, the obstacle, the old fool. I opened the bedroom door and took a step onto the landing. I made sure to catch my toe on the carpet, stumbling heavily against the banister. The wood groaned under my weight. "Dad, is that you?" Terrence called out from the bottom of the stairs. I didn't answer immediately. I let a few seconds of silence stretch out, creating tension. Then I groaned a low, confused sound. "Terry." I called out, my voice weak and thready. My legs, they feel like lead sun. He was up the stairs in seconds, Victoria right on his heels. They didn't look worried, they looked eager. Terrence grabbed my left arm and Victoria took my right. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my bicep through my flannel shirt. It wasn't a supporting grip. It was a restraining one. "We got you, Dad." Victoria cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my stomach turn. "You just need to come downstairs. Althea made you a nice breakfast. You need to sign some papers for the bank, remember? Just routine stuff to keep your account safe." Safe. That was a laugh. I let them drag me down the stairs. I made myself heavy, dead weight leaning into them, forcing them to struggle. I wanted them to feel the physical burden of me. I wanted them to sweat. "I feel dizzy," I mumbled, letting my head roll back. "The room is spinning. Did I take my medicine?" "Yes, Dad, you took it," Terrence said, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee near my ear. "Just keep walking. We are almost there." They guided me into the dining room. The table was set, but not for a meal. The breakfast plates were pushed to the side. In the center of the table, sitting on a crisp placemat, was a stack of legal documents. A black fountain pen lay next to them, looking like a weapon. Althea was standing by the window, her back to us. She was twisting a dish towel in her hands over and over again. She couldn't even look at me. She knew what was happening. She knew they were marching me to the slaughterhouse, and she was just going to watch the traffic go by. "Sit here, Dad," Victoria commanded, pushing me down into the chair. I slumped forward, letting my chin hit my chest. I looked at the papers through half-closed eyes. The text was blurry, but I could make out the bold letters at the top. Last will and testament, and below that power of attorney. They weren't wasting any time. They didn't want to wait for the poison to finish me off. They wanted the legal rights locked down today. "What is this?" I asked, slurring my words intentionally. "It looks like important stuff." "It is just housekeeping," Jeremiah, Althea said from the window, her voice trembling. "Just to make sure the bills get paid if you get sick again." I looked at the document. I saw the clause. It transferred all real estate holdings, including the 50 hectares of timberland, to Terrence Brooks immediately upon signature. It granted Victoria full executorship of my estate. It left Zoe absolutely nothing. Not a dime. Not a memory. Victoria picked up the pen. She uncapped it and shoved it into my trembling hand. "Sign right there, Dad," she said, pointing to the line with a manicured fingernail. "Right where the X is." I held the pen, hovering over the paper. My hand shook violently. I wasn't faking the anger that caused the tremor, but I was faking the lack of control. I let the tip of the pen dance around the signature line, making ink blots on the pristine white paper. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't hold it steady." "Just focus." Victoria hissed, her mask slipping for a second. Her eyes were hard, cold flint. "Sign your name, Jeremiah. Do it now." She grabbed my hand, wrapping her fingers around mine, forcing the pen down. It was a violation. It was assault. She was physically forcing me to sign my life away. Terrence stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Do it, Dad. Stop fighting. It is for your own good." I let out a moan of distress. I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the table, rolling across the document and leaving a long, black streak of ink across the text. I dropped it. I cried out, sounding pathetic and helpless. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." Victoria let out a growl of frustration. She snatched the pen up and jammed it back into my hand. "Sign it, you old fool," she muttered under her breath, so low only I could hear. I looked at her. I looked right into her eyes. And for a split second, I let the fog clear. I let her see Big J. I let her see the man who had walked out of burning buildings carrying grown men on his back. I saw her falter. I saw fear flicker in her eyes. But before she could process what she had seen, the doorbell rang. It was a loud, sharp sound that cut through the tension in the room like a fire axe. Victoria jumped. Terrence let go of my shoulders. Althea spun around from the window. "Who is that?" Victoria snapped. "We aren't expecting anyone." "Maybe it is the doctor," Terrence said, panic edging into his voice. "Maybe he came to check on Dad." "Get rid of them," Victoria ordered. "Don't let them in. Hide the papers." She snatched the documents from the table, shoving them under her placemat. But it was too late. I heard the front door open. I heard heavy, confident footsteps in the hallway. I didn't lock the front door. I had unlocked it when I came in at 5 in the morning, knowing exactly who was coming at 9 sharp. Benjamin Fletcher walked into the dining room. He was a big man, a former linebacker who had become the sharpest civil rights attorney in the state. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and a smile that could stop traffic. He wasn't just my lawyer. He was my brother in arms. We had grown up on the same block. "Good morning, family," Benjamin boomed, his voice filling the room. "I hope I am not interrupting breakfast." Victoria stood up, blocking his view of me. "Who are you?" she demanded. "You can't just walk in here." Benjamin ignored her. He looked straight at me. His eyes took in my slumped posture, the ink on my hands, the fear in the room. He knew. He saw it all. "Jeremiah, my friend," he said, walking past Victoria as if she were a piece of furniture. "You look like you have had a rough morning, but I have news that might perk you up." I sat up a little straighter, letting some of the confusion drop from my face. "Ben," I croaked. "What are you doing here?" "I tried to call, but your phone must be off," Benjamin said, pulling a sleek leather portfolio from his briefcase. I couldn't wait. The state contract came through Jay, the Wildfire mitigation consultancy. They approved the budget this morning. He paused, letting the silence stretch. He looked at Terrence, he looked at Althea, and finally he rested his gaze on Victoria. "The first installment of the retainer just hit the escrow account," he said clearly, $500,000, and that is just the signing bonus. The full contract is worth $2 million over 3 years. The room went dead silent. You could hear the refrigerator humming. You could hear the wind outside. $500,000. I watched the transformation happen in real time. It was grotesque. Victoria's face went from hostility to shock and then to a greedy, fawning adoration. Her posture changed. She uncrossed her arms. She licked her lips. 500,000, Terrence whispered, his eyes bulging. "That is right," Benjamin said, tapping the portfolio. "But I need Jeremiah's signature on the acceptance letter. And of course, since the funds are being deposited into his personal account, I need to make sure he is capable of managing it." Victoria moved so fast it was a blur. She pulled the placemat up, grabbing the fake will she had hidden. She crumpled it in her hand, shoving it into her pocket. She turned to me, and the smile she plastered on her face was bright enough to blind. "Oh my goodness," she gushed, her voice rising an octave. "Dad, did you hear that? $500,000. That is amazing. You are amazing." She reached out and brushed a piece of lint off my shoulder, her touch gentle caressing. "We were just helping Dad with some boring paperwork," she lied, looking at Benjamin. But this is wonderful news. Dad is perfectly capable, isn't he, Terrence? He is just tired from the drive. Terrence nodded vigorously, looking like a bobblehead. Yeah, absolutely. Just tired. Sharp as a tack, usually. Althea finally turned from the window. She was crying. But they weren't tears of relief. They were tears of greed. She saw a new kitchen. She saw new clothes. She saw her status in the church rising. Jeremiah, she said, walking over to me, I knew you would provide for us. The Lord always provides. I looked at them, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law. 3 minutes ago, they were forcing a pen into my hand to steal my land and leave me to rot. Now that they smelled fresh blood, they were circling back, licking their chops, waiting for a piece of the new kill. I looked at Benjamin. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The hook was set. I sat up completely straight. I shook my head as if clearing cobwebs. $500,000, I asked, my voice stronger now. Well, that changes things, doesn't it? It certainly does, Dad. Victoria said, pouring me a fresh cup of coffee. It changes everything. Why don't you sign Mr. Fletcher's papers? Then we can talk about celebrating. Maybe we can look at investing some of that for the family. I took the pen from Benjamin. My hand didn't shake this time. I signed my name with a flourish. Big, sharp J, tight loop. I handed the paper back to Benjamin. There you go, Ben. Thank you. Victoria was practically vibrating. She was already spending the money in her head. She had forgotten about the will. She had forgotten about the poison. She had forgotten about Zoe freezing in the cottage. Greed is a powerful drug. It makes you stupid. It makes you forget your long game. I looked at Victoria. You know, dear, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. You are right. We should celebrate. Maybe we can have a big dinner tonight. My parents always said money is meant to be shared with those who love you. Victoria beamed. Exactly, Dad. Exactly. I watched her. I watched the predator become the scavenger. She thought she had won the lottery. She didn't know she had just signed her own death warrant. The money was real. But it wasn't for them. It was the fuel for the fire I was building around them, and they were going to stand right in the center of it, laughing until the flames consumed them. The landline on the kitchen wall rang with a shrill mechanical scream that sliced right through the celebration. Victoria froze with the coffee pot mid-pour. Terrence stopped chewing his celebratory pastry. Althea looked up from the table where she had been silently calculating how to spend the $500,000 Benjamin Fletcher had just promised. The sound was jarring in the sudden silence of the kitchen. I let it ring twice. I needed them to feel the intrusion. I needed the tension to spike. I stood up slowly, my knees popping loudly in the quiet room. I shuffled toward the phone, letting my hand tremble just enough to sell the performance. I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear with both hands as if it were a heavy weight. Hello, I said, my voice cracking. Is this the residence of Jeremiah Brooks? The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, and familiar. It was Dr. Marcus Vance calling exactly on cue. Yes, this is Jeremiah. Mr. Brooks, this is Dr. Vance from St. Jude's Hospital. I am calling regarding a Jane Doe admission we received early this morning. A young African-American female, approximately 12 years old. She was found unresponsive near the highway north of Aurora. She matches the description of your granddaughter, Zoe. I let out a gasp that was only half fake. Hearing it said aloud, even as part of a script, made my chest tighten. Zoe. I whispered loud enough for the room to hear. You found Zoe. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted instantly. It went from a warm, greedy celebration to a cold panic. Victoria dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the tile floor, sending hot brown liquid splashing across her expensive slacks and the pristine cabinets. Terrence turned a sickly shade of gray, his mouth falling open. Althea stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, crashing against the floor. Is she okay? I asked into the phone, letting panic seep into my voice. Is she hurt? She is in critical condition. Mr. Brooks Marcus recited his lines perfectly. Severe hypothermia, multiple fractures. We are doing everything we can, but the prognosis is uncertain. We need you to come down to identify her and make medical decisions. I dropped the phone. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth, hitting the wall with a rhythmic thud. What is it? Jeremiah, Althea demanded, her voice sharp and devoid of any warmth. What did they say? They found her, I stammered, leaning against the wall for support. They found a girl. Near Aurora. She is hurt, Althea. They said she is... critical. I watched them. I watched the three people who were supposed to be my family. A normal family would be grabbing coats. A normal grandmother would be screaming, asking which hospital. A normal father would be running to the car. But they didn't move. They stood frozen in a triangle of guilt and calculation. Victoria was the first to speak. Her eyes were darting back and forth, calculating odds, calculating risks. Found her, she hissed. How? Who found her? She was locked in. Terrence put his head in his hands. Oh God, she is alive. If she talks, if she tells them we sent her there. Shut up, Victoria snapped at him. She won't talk. Hypothermia causes memory loss, brain damage. She won't remember anything. I looked at Althea, my wife, the woman I had shared a bed with for 4 decades. She was staring at the swinging phone, her face a mask of cold, hard stone. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at her son. She was looking at the future she thought she had just lost. Is she going to die? Althea asked. She didn't ask it with fear. She didn't ask it with hope. She asked it the way you ask if it is going to rain on your picnic. It was a logistical question, a question of inconvenience. I don't know, I whispered, letting tears well up in my eyes. They said it is bad. Althea walked over to me. She didn't hug me. She didn't offer comfort. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flannel shirt. Listen to me, Jeremiah, she said, her voice low and intense. If she dies, if she passes, we need to know the procedure. Did the doctor say anything about the coroner? Did he mention an autopsy? I stared at her. The horror of her question took a moment to truly sink in. She wasn't worried about Zoe suffering. She was worried about an autopsy. She was worried that a medical examiner would find the old breaks, the malnutrition, the evidence of neglect. Why would you ask that? Althea, I asked, my voice genuinely trembling now. Our baby is hurt. She isn't our baby. Althea spat, the venom finally spilling over. She is Terrence's mistake. She is a reminder of that whore he was with before he met a decent woman like Victoria. I told you we should have put her up for adoption 10 years ago. But no, you had to play the hero. You had to bring that stray into our house. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The hatred in her eyes was ancient. It had been festering there for a decade, hidden behind hymns and Sunday dinners. She didn't just dislike Zoe, she loathed her. She hated her because Zoe was proof that her perfect son was flawed. She hated her because Zoe was black and beautiful and smart and everything Althea wasn't. If she dies, Althea continued, her eyes narrowing. It might be a blessing, Jeremiah. God works in mysterious ways. We have this new money now. The contract. We can start fresh, without burdens, without the past dragging us down. But we need to make sure the paperwork is right. Does the insurance still pay out if it is an accident outside the home? Insurance. She knew about the policy. Of course she did. She was part of it. She wasn't just following Victoria's lead. She was an active participant. She wanted that $2 million just as much as they did. Victoria stepped over the broken glass and spilled coffee, her shoes crunching. She stood next to Althea, forming a united front. Mom is right. Dad, she said, her voice smooth again, regaining control. We have to be practical. If Zoe is brain dead, if she is going to be a vegetable, we can't let her suffer. We have to be ready to make the hard decisions, the compassionate decisions. Compassionate. She meant pulling the plug. She meant finishing the job that the cold hadn't managed to do. Terrence lifted his head. His face was wet with sweat. What if she wakes up, he whispered. What if she tells the police about the cottage, about the lock? She won't wake up, Victoria said, glaring at him. We will make sure she gets the best care, or the appropriate care. I looked at them, really looked at them. The monsters in my kitchen. They were discussing the murder of a child while standing in a puddle of coffee. They were discussing insurance payouts before the body was even cold. I felt a fire burning in my gut, but it wasn't the out-of-control blaze of anger anymore. It was the steady blue flame of a torch. Controlled, hot, destructive. I need to go to the bathroom, I said, clutching my stomach. My stomach, the stress. I think I am going to be sick. Go ahead, Jeremiah, Althea said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. We will get our coats. We will drive you to the hospital. We need to be there to support you. Support me. They needed to be there to silence Zoe. I shuffled out of the kitchen, leaving them to their whispers and their cleanup. I walked down the hall to the guest bathroom on the first floor. I went inside and locked the door. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud and hard to mask any sound. I sat on the closed toilet lid and pulled out my smartphone. Not the jitterbug phone they thought I used, my real phone. An encrypted satellite-enabled device I used for fire command. I opened my banking app. My hands were steady now. I accessed my offshore accounts, the ones holding the $3 million in accumulated assets. The money I had saved for 40 years. The money that was supposed to be for all of us. I initiated a wire transfer. Recipient, Zoe Brooks, irrevocable trust. Amount $2,500,000. Execution immediate. I typed in the authorization code. I watched the progress bar load. Click. Transfer complete. 80% of my liquid assets were gone. They were safe. They were locked in a trust managed by a firm in Switzerland that answered only to me and eventually to Zoe. Even if Althea managed to poison me tonight, even if they forged 100 wills, they wouldn't get a dime of that money. It was ghost money now. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was gray. My eyes looked old. But behind the fatigue there was a spark. I had lived with a snake for 40 years. I had slept beside her. I had broken bread with her. I had raised a son with her. And I never saw the fangs until she tried to bite the one thing I loved more than her. Althea Brooks wasn't my wife. She was an enemy combatant. And she was currently standing in my kitchen planning the death of my granddaughter. I flushed the toilet just for the sound. I splashed cold water on my face, leaving it wet to look like sweat or tears. I unlocked the door. It was time to go to the hospital. It was time to introduce my family to the consequences of their actions. I walked back into the hallway. Althea was waiting with my coat. She held it out for me, a dutiful wife, a loving partner. "Let's go, Jeremiah," she said softly. "We need to be a family right now." I slipped my arms into the coat. I felt her hands brush my shoulders. Her touch used to comfort me. Now it felt like a spider crawling on my skin. "Yes, Althea," I said, buttoning the coat over my chest where my heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm of war. "We need to be a family." I followed them out to the car. I watched them get in. Terrence driving, Victoria in the passenger seat checking her makeup in the mirror, ensuring she looked appropriately distraught. Althea in the back waiting for me. I climbed in beside her. She took my hand. Her palm was dry and cool. "It will be okay," she whispered. "God has a plan." I squeezed her hand back. I squeezed it hard enough to feel the bones shift. "Yes, he does." "Althea," I said, looking out the window as we pulled away from the house I would never call home again. "He certainly does. And so do I." We arrived back from the hospital at 6 in the evening. The house was quiet, but the tension was loud enough to break glass. I went straight to my recliner in the living room, feigning the exhaustion of a man broken by grief. Althea went to the kitchen not to cook for comfort, but because she needed to look busy. Terrence and Victoria disappeared upstairs, probably to coordinate their stories or check their bank accounts to see if the insurance money had miraculously appeared yet. Half an hour later, a silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. It parked aggressively, blocking my truck in. It was Victoria's parents. I had met them only a handful of times in 10 years. They were the kind of people who smiled with their mouths, but never with their eyes. Her father, Richard, was a man who wore suits that cost more than my first house. Her mother, Catherine, was a woman who looked at everything in my home as if she were inspecting a budget motel room for bedbugs. They walked in without knocking. Victoria had given them a key years ago, a violation I had ignored to keep the peace. Richard swept into the living room, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of desperation. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on my worn leather chair, the family photos on the mantel, and the old rug Althea had crocheted. He curled his lips slightly. It wasn't a sneer exactly. It was worse. It was pity. Althea came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She had started a pot of collard greens and ham hocks, my favorite comfort food. The rich, savory smell filled the house. Catherine wrinkled her nose, pulling a silk handkerchief from her purse and dabbing at her nostrils. "Oh, Althea," she said, her voice high and breathless. "You are cooking. It smells very pungent, very authentic." Authentic. That was their code word. It meant black. It meant poor. It meant beneath them. Althea froze. "I am sorry, Catherine," she mumbled. "I can open a window." "No need," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "We won't be staying long. We just came to offer our condolences to Jeremiah on the situation with the girl, and to discuss business." He turned his gaze to me. He didn't see a grieving grandfather. He didn't see a retired commander who had led hundreds of men through hellfire. He saw an old black man in a flannel shirt sitting in a house that wasn't good enough for his daughter. He saw a mark. "Jeremiah," he said, stepping closer, but not offering his hand. "Victoria tells us you are having a difficult time. Confusion, memory loss. It must be terrifying to feel your mind slipping away." I looked up at him. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction. I blinked slowly like an owl in daylight. "It is hard," I rasped. "I lose things. I lose time." Richard nodded at Catherine. "See, I told you. He is ripe." They sat down on the sofa opposite me. They didn't take off their coats. They sat on the edge of the cushions as if they were afraid they might catch poverty if they leaned back. Althea brought them tea on a tray. They didn't say thank you. They didn't even look at her. To them, she was just the help. She was furniture. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He clasped his hands together. A gold ring with a family crest that probably didn't exist 2 generations ago flashed in the light. "Jeremiah, we need to talk about your land," he began. "The timberland in Oregon. Victoria mentioned you have 50 hectares sitting there doing nothing." I nodded slowly. "Ideally. Trees. Just trees," exactly, Richard said. "Richard, just trees. And that is the problem. I have friends in the State Zoning Commission. They tell me there are new regulations coming down the pipeline. Environmental restrictions, fire hazard codes." He paused for effect. "You are sitting on a liability, Jeremiah. A massive liability." He pulled a folded map from his inside jacket pocket. He spread it out on the coffee table, pushing aside Althea's Bible. It was a map of my land. He had red lines drawn all over it. "Look here," he said, tracing a line with a manicured finger. "This is a Zone 4 fire hazard area. The state is cracking down. If you don't clear the underbrush and install fire breaks within 30 days, they are going to fine you. Heavily. We are talking $10,000 a day. And if you can't pay, they will seize the land under eminent domain. You will lose it all and get nothing." I stared at the map. I knew the fire codes. I knew them because I wrote half of them during my time on the state board. Zone 4 didn't exist in that county. The underbrush on my land was cleared annually by a contract crew I hired myself. The fire breaks were double the legal width. My land was a model of forestry management. But Richard didn't know that. He thought I was just a retired hose dragger who got lucky buying dirt cheap in the 80s. He was lying to my face using legal jargon he barely understood to scare an old man. It was predatory. It was vile. "So what do I do?" I asked, letting my voice tremble. "I don't have money for fines. I don't want the government to take it." "That is why we are here," Richard said, smiling that shark smile. "I want to help you, for Victoria's sake. I am willing to take that burden off your hands. I have a developer friend who can handle the fines. He is willing to buy the land from you." "Buy it?" I asked. "How much?" "Well, considering the fines and the liability, it is practically worthless," Richard said, sighing as if he were doing me a great charity. "But because we are family, I can offer you $50,000. Today. Cash. $50,000. The timber alone was worth $2 million. The land itself was worth $3 million. He was trying to steal $5 million from me for the price of a mid-range sedan. And he was doing it while my granddaughter lay in a hospital bed broken by his daughter's hands. Althea gasped from the corner. $50,000. "Oh, Jeremiah, that is a lot of money. We could fix the roof. We could pay bills." She was so small. Her vision was so limited. She would sell a gold mine for a plate of copper just because it shined. I looked at Richard. I saw the greed in his eyes. It was a hunger, a desperate, gnawing need. He needed this deal. Victoria had said her father was broke. This land wasn't for a developer friend. It was for him. He needed to flip it to save his own skin. I pretended to think. I rubbed my chin. I looked at the map. I looked at Althea. $50,000, I said, slowly testing the words. "That would help. That would help a lot." It is a generous offer, Jeremiah Catherine chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. Most people would just let the state take it. We are trying to save your legacy, or at least what is left of it. I leaned back in my chair. I let out a long, wheezing breath. Okay, I said. Okay. I don't want trouble with the government. I don't want fines. Richard's eyes lit up. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a contract. It was already typed up. He had a pen ready. Smart man, he said, uncapping the pen. Just sign here and we will transfer the funds to your account in a few days. I raised my hand, stopping him. No, I said. No banks. Richard froze. What do you mean, no banks? I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The banks steal from you. I saw it on the news. They freeze your money when you get old. They say you are crazy and they take it. I don't trust them. I looked him dead in the eye. If you want the land, I need cash. $50,000. In bills. Small bills. Richard laughed nervously. Jeremiah, that is highly irregular. Nobody carries that kind of cash. It is dangerous. Then no deal, I said, crossing my arms and looking away like a stubborn child. I will just let the government take it. At least they won't freeze my checking account. Richard looked at Catherine. Panic flickered behind his calm facade. He didn't have $50,000 in cash. He probably didn't have $50,000 in the bank. He was going to have to borrow it, beg for it, or steal it. He was going to have to leverage everything he had left to get that cash by tomorrow. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted him all in. I wanted him to expose himself completely. Fine, Richard hissed, slamming his hand on the table. Fine. You want cash, you get cash, tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. Here. He stood up, buttoning his coat. He looked furious. He looked trapped. Have the deed ready, Jeremiah. And don't play games with me. I am doing you a favor. I am not playing games, I said, looking up at him, my eyes wide and innocent. I just want to be safe. I just want to protect my family. We will bring the money, Catherine said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. And then we are taking Victoria and Terrence out of this depressing house for a real dinner. This place smells like poverty. They marched out the door without saying goodbye. Althea rushed to lock it behind them. Did you hear that, Jeremiah? She whispered, her eyes shining. $50,000. Tomorrow. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had helped try to kill my granddaughter. Yes, Althea, I said, my voice flat. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the Mercedes speed away. They were scrambling now. They were making calls, liquidating assets, calling in favors from loan sharks. They were digging a hole so deep they would never climb out. And tomorrow at 10 a.m., I was going to be standing at the edge with a shovel ready to bury them. The clock on the wall ticked toward 10 in the morning, but the celebration in my living room had started an hour ago. Richard and Catherine had arrived early, carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. They didn't bring the $50,000 in cash yet. They said it was on the way, a secure courier was bringing it. That was a lie, of course. They were stalling, hoping I would sign the deed before the cash arrived, but they were celebrating as if the ink was already dry. I stood in the hallway just out of sight, listening to the clinking of crystal glasses. Althea had brought out her good china, the set we only used for Thanksgiving. She was serving them pastries and cheese, moving around the room like a nervous waitress hoping for a good tip. To the future, Richard toasted, his voice booming with the arrogance of a man who thinks he is stealing candy from a baby. To 50 hectares of prime development land, and to the end of our financial headaches. To the end of headaches, Victoria chimed in. Her voice was light, airy. She sounded relieved. And to Jeremiah for being so cooperative. They all laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound. I really thought he would put up more of a fight, Terrence said, his mouth full of food. I thought the old man had more grit. But he just rolled over. The dementia act is really taking hold, or maybe he just gave up. He is simple, Richard said dismissively. He is a man who spent his life holding a hose. He doesn't understand finance. He doesn't understand leverage. He sees $50,000 and thinks he is rich. He doesn't know he is sitting on a gold mine, and frankly, he doesn't deserve it. Land like that belongs to people who know how to exploit it. I clenched my fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms. Exploitation. That was their religion. And what about the girl? Catherine asked, her voice lowering slightly. Any news from the hospital? Victoria sighed, the sound of someone burdened by a trivial annoyance. Still critical. But honestly, Mom, it is better if nature takes its course. If she wakes up, well, it gets complicated. But the doctor said the exposure was severe. Brain damage is likely. Even if she survives, she won't be talking. She will just be another expense. Another expense. My granddaughter. My heart. They were talking about her like she was a broken appliance they needed to discard. Don't worry about the girl, Richard said. Once we have the land and the insurance money comes through, we can put her in a state facility, somewhere far away, out of sight, out of mind. Then you two can finally start your real life. Have a baby of your own. A proper heir. A proper heir. They meant a white heir. They meant a child that didn't have Terrence's past stamped on her face. Althea spoke up, then her voice trembling with eagerness. And the kitchen, Victoria. You promised we could redo the kitchen once the money comes. Victoria laughed. Yes, Althea. We will get you your granite countertops. Just keep the old man happy until the notary gets here. Is he still asleep? He is resting, Althea assured them. He took his pills. He is out cold. I wasn't asleep. I was wide awake. And I wasn't alone. I turned to the heavy oak front door. I unlocked it silently. I opened it just wide enough to signal Dr. Marcus Vance, who was waiting in the specialized transport van in the driveway. He nodded. He opened the side door of the van and lowered the ramp. I walked out, my breath misting in the cold morning air. I helped Marcus unload the wheelchair. Zoe was sitting in it wrapped in a thick wool blanket. She looked small. Her face was still pale, and there were dark bruises blooming on her cheeks from the cold, but her eyes were open. They were fierce. They were the eyes of a Brooks. "Are you ready, baby?" I whispered to her, smoothing her hair. She looked at the house. She looked at the window where she could hear her father laughing. "I am ready, Papa," she said. Her voice was raspy but steady. I wheeled her up the ramp to the porch. I stopped at the door. I took a deep breath. I channeled every ounce of fire I had ever fought, every wall of heat I had ever stood against. I wasn't just a grandfather anymore. I was the reckoning. I kicked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a thunderous crash that shook the house. The laughter inside died instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. I pushed the wheelchair into the living room. The wheels hummed on the hardwood floor. I stopped right in the center of the room, directly in front of the coffee table where the champagne bucket sat, sweating condensation onto the wood. "Hello, family," I said, my voice low and hard. "Sorry to interrupt the party, but someone wanted to say hello." The reaction was visceral. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Victoria was holding a champagne flute halfway to her mouth. Her hand opened involuntarily. The glass fell. It hit the floor and shattered, sending shards of crystal and expensive wine exploding across the rug. She didn't look down. She stared at Zoe, her face draining of all color until she looked like a wax figure. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Terrence made a noise like a strangled cat. He scrambled backward on the sofa, knocking over a lamp. He looked at Zoe like he was seeing a ghost. "Zoe," he whispered. "Zoe." Althea dropped the tray of pastries she was holding. Cream puffs and danishes scattered across the floor, mixing with the broken glass. She put her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. Not guilt. Terror. She was terrified because the evidence of her cruelty was sitting right in front of her, breathing and watching. Richard and Catherine sat frozen on the edge of their seats, their aristocratic composure shattered. They looked from Zoe to me to Victoria, trying to process what this meant for their deal. Zoe sat up straighter in the chair. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She looked directly at Victoria. She didn't blink. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was small, but it cut through the room like a knife. "I didn't die. I didn't go to sleep like you told me to." Victoria let out a high-pitched keen, a sound of pure panic. "That is impossible," she shrieked. You were dead," I finished for her. "You thought she was dead. You hoped she was dead, because dead girls don't talk. Dead girls don't tell the police who locked them in a freezing cottage without food or water." I stepped forward, my shadow falling over them. "But she is not dead, Victoria. She is very much alive, and she remembers everything." Victoria scrambled to her feet. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for a lie that could save her. "This is a trick," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. You senile old man. You kidnapped her. You hurt her. You are trying to frame us." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. "Frame you?" I asked. "I don't need to frame you, Victoria. I have the lockbox." The color that had started to return to her face vanished again. The gray box. I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "The one under the floorboards. The one with the insurance policy. The one with the forged custody papers. The one with the journal where you wrote down exactly how you were going to kill a 12-year-old girl." Victoria lunged. It happened fast. Desperation makes people do stupid, dangerous things. She didn't lunge at me. She lunged at Zoe. She crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, her hands reaching out, her fingers curved into claws. She was going for Zoe's throat. She wanted to silence the witness. She wanted to finish what the cold hadn't done. "You little brat," she screamed, her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "Shut up! Shut up!" Zoe flinched, throwing her hands up to protect her face, but Victoria never reached her. I moved. I didn't move like an old man. I moved like a linebacker. But before I could grab her, Terrence jumped up. He didn't jump up to stop his wife. He jumped up to stop me. He stepped in my path, throwing his hands up, trying to block me from protecting Zoe. "Dad, stop," he yelled. "Don't touch her." He was protecting the woman who tried to kill his daughter. He was choosing the monster over his own blood. That was the last straw. The last thread of patience snapped. I didn't slow down. I didn't hesitate. I swung my right hand, the hand that had held axes and hoses and pulled men from burning trucks. I put 40 years of labor and rage into that swing. My open palm connected with the side of Terrence's face. The sound was sickening, a wet, meaty slap that echoed off the walls. Terrence lifted off his feet. He spun in the air, crashing into the wall beside the fireplace. He slid down to the floor, dazed blood already welling in the corner of his mouth. Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. She looked at her husband on the floor, then she looked at me. For the first time, she saw Big J. She saw the man who commanded fire, and she was terrified. "Sit down," I roared, my voice shaking the windows. "Sit down before I forget that I don't hit women." Victoria collapsed onto the floor, sobbing hysterically. I stood over them, chest heaving. I looked at Richard and Catherine, who were cowering on the sofa, clutching each other. I looked at Althea, who was on her knees praying or begging, I didn't care which. "The play is over," I declared, my voice booming. "The curtain is down. The masks are off." I walked over to the television, the massive 85-inch screen Terrence had bought with my money. I pulled the remote from my pocket. "You wanted to celebrate?" I said, turning to face them. "You wanted a show. Fine. I have a show for you." I pointed the remote at the screen. "I am going to show you exactly who you are, and then I am going to show the world." I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The first image appeared. It was the kitchen. It was yesterday. It was Althea crushing pills into my coffee. The room went silent again, except for the sound of Victoria's weeping and the recording of my wife plotting my murder. "Watch," I commanded. "Watch and learn what happens when you play with fire." Victoria scrambled backward on the expensive rug, her heels digging into the pile as she put distance between us. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and terror, but beneath the fear, the survival instinct of a cornered rat was taking over. She didn't check on her husband, who was groaning on the floor, holding his swelling jaw. She didn't check on the in-laws she claimed to love. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she dropped it once before fumbling to dial. "Call the police!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and breaking. "Call them right now, Mother. This man is insane. He has lost his mind. He kidnapped a child from a hospital. That is a federal offense. He assaulted my husband. He is dangerous." She looked at me with wild eyes, trying to rally her parents, who were shrinking into the sofa cushions. "Did you see that she yelled at Richard? He hit Terrence. He threatened to kill me. We need the police. We need him committed. We need him locked away where he can't hurt anyone ever again." She turned to Zoe, pointing a shaking finger at the girl in the wheelchair. "And you little liar, you are in on it. You let him take you. You are going to juvenile detention. You are going to rot in a cell for helping this senile old lunatic frame your own family." She was loud. She was convincing. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her. She was weaving a narrative of victimhood out of thin air, trying to spin the violence of my protection into an act of aggression. She wanted the police here. She thought she could charm them. She thought she could use her tears and her father's expensive suit to convince the officers that the angry black man in the flannel shirt was the villain. I watched her rant. I watched her try to gaslight an entire room. I didn't move to stop her. I didn't try to take the phone away. I just stood there, the remote control heavy in my hand, waiting for her to run out of breath. "Go ahead, Victoria," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a cold wind. "Call them. Dial 911. Tell them everything. Tell them I hit your husband. Tell them I took Zoe." She paused, her thumb hovering over the call button. She looked at me confused by my lack of fear. "But when they get here," I continued, taking a step toward the television, "I am going to show them a movie. And I think they are going to find the plot very interesting." I turned my back on her, dismissing her threat. I pointed the remote at the 85-inch screen that dominated the living room wall. It was a smart TV top of the line connected directly to my cloud server. You wanted to know how I knew Victoria. You wanted to know how I knew about the cottage, about the poison, about the forgery. I pressed the play button. The screen flickered from black to a high-definition, wide-angle view of the kitchen. The timestamp in the corner read yesterday morning. The audio was crisp, picked up by the microphone hidden in the pot rack. On the screen, Althea stood at the counter. She looked nervous, looking over her shoulder. She opened a small bottle of pills. She poured them into a mortar and pestle. The sound of her grinding them was loud, scratching, grinding. Then the camera captured her pouring the white powder into my coffee pot. She stirred it. She whispered something to herself. "Forgive me, Lord, but it is for the best." In the living room, the real Althea let out a wail of despair. She covered her face with her hands, rocking back and forth on her knees. "No, no, no," she moaned. Victoria stared at the screen, her mouth open. I pressed a button, skipping forward. The scene changed. It was the dining room table, lunchtime. Terrence, Victoria, and Althea were eating. The audio filled the room. "We need to up the dose." Victoria's voice on the recording was clear, arrogant, and cold. "He is still too lucid. If he talks to the lawyer like this, we won't get power of attorney. We need him drooling Terrence. We need him to look like a vegetable." On the screen, Terrence nodded, chewing his food. "Maybe we can mix it with the whiskey he likes. It will hit him harder." In the living room, the real Terrence stopped groaning. He pushed himself up into a sitting position, staring at his own face on the TV, plotting his father's demise. I skipped forward again. This was the one that would seal the deal. This was the smoking gun. The scene was the living room late last night. Victoria and Terrence were sitting on the sofa, the same sofa her parents were cowering on now. They had a stack of papers on the coffee table. Terrence was holding a pen over a piece of paper. He was practicing a signature. "My signature." "The loop is too wide," Victoria said on the recording, leaning over his shoulder. "Your father makes his J sharp like a fishhook. Do it again." Terrence sighed. "I am trying. It is hard to copy a man's hand when he is shaking." "Just get it close enough," Victoria snapped. "Once the girl is dead and he is committed, no one is going to look that closely at the transfer deed. We will own the land. We will own the accounts. We will own everything." On the screen, Terrence looked up. "What if the girl doesn't die? What if someone finds her in the cottage?" Victoria laughed. It was a sound that made the air in the room turn stagnant. "Who goes to Aurora in a blizzard, Terrence? No one. She is going to freeze. It will be painless, like going to sleep. And when she is gone, we collect the 2 million. It is clean. It is necessary." I paused the video on Victoria's smiling face. The image froze, capturing her in that moment of pure, unadulterated evil. I turned back to the room. The silence was absolute. No one was screaming anymore. No one was threatening to call the police. The weight of the truth was crushing them. Victoria lowered the phone slowly. Her face was pale, drained of blood. She looked at the TV, then at me, then at her parents. That is fake," she whispered. "Deep fake. AI. You made that up." I laughed. It was a harsh bark. "Nice try," I said. "But the timestamps match the metadata. The audio matches the acoustics of this room. And I have hours of it. Hours of you plotting. Hours of you insulting my wife. Hours of you spending my money." I looked at Althea. "I have video of you burning Zoe's clothes, Althea. I have video of you planting her shoes by the river." Althea sobbed louder, curling into a ball on the floor. I looked at Terrence. "I have video of you forging the deed transfer. I have video of you logging into my bank account and failing the password attempts." Terrence looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "And you too," I said, turning my attention to Richard and Catherine. Richard tried to stand up, straightening his tie, attempting to regain some shred of dignity. "Now see here, Jeremiah," he blustered, his voice shaking. "This has nothing to do with us. We didn't know anything about this domestic unpleasantness. We were just here to conduct a business transaction." "A business transaction," I repeated, stepping closer to him. "You mean the $50,000 for $5 million worth of timberland? You mean the lies about the fire codes?" "I was misinformed," Richard said, backing away. "My sources—" "Your sources are non-existent, Richard," I cut him off, "just like your assets." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my back pocket. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases. "You see, Richard, when you told me about the zoning issues, I decided to make a few calls. I still have friends in the state capitol, and I have friends in the Federal Bureau." Richard's eyes went wide. "I ran your name, Richard. I ran your company. Prestige Holdings, right?" He didn't answer. He was sweating now, beading on his forehead. "It turns out Prestige Holdings is currently the subject of a federal investigation," I said, reading from the paper. "Wire fraud, money laundering, running a Ponzi scheme involving non-existent resort developments in 3 states. Catherine let out a gasp, clutching her husband's arm. "Richard," she whispered, "you said that was handled. You said the lawyers fixed it." "He lied to you too, Catherine," I said. "Just like his daughter lies, it runs in the blood." I looked back at Richard. "The FBI has been looking for a reason to freeze your accounts. They were looking for a concrete link to a fraudulent transaction. And guess what? You just gave it to them." I pointed to the contract he had put on the table earlier, the one offering $50,000 for my land, attempting to defraud a senior citizen out of assets to cover up a federal crime. "That is a felony, Richard. A big one." You didn't call them?" Richard stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. "You wouldn't. We are family. I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. "I called them 30 minutes ago," I said, checking my watch. "I sent them the audio of our conversation yesterday. I sent them the contract you drafted. I sent them your location." Richard looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked like he was about to run. "Don't bother," I said. "They aren't coming from the city. They have a field office 10 miles from here. They are probably turning onto the street right now." As if on cue, the sound of sirens cut through the morning air. It wasn't one siren. It was a chorus. Victoria screamed again, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a sound of pure despair. She ran to the window, pulling back the curtains. Blue and red lights flashed against the glass, painting the living room in the colors of judgment. "They are here," she sobbed, turning to Terrence. "They are here. Do something." Terrence just sat on the floor, holding his face, rocking back and forth. "It is over," he mumbled. "It is all over." I walked over to Zoe. I put my hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "You got them, Papa," she whispered. "We got them, baby," I said. I turned back to the room one last time. The police were pounding on the door. The house was surrounded. Althea was praying. Terrence was crying. Victoria was hyperventilating. Richard and Catherine were arguing in hushed, vicious tones. It was a masterpiece of destruction, and I had orchestrated every beat of it. I walked to the door, not to escape, but to welcome the cavalry. I opened it wide. "Officers," I said, stepping aside. "They are all yours. The evidence is on the TV. The criminals are in the living room. And the victim—" I pointed to Zoe. "The victim is ready to go home. But not this home. This house was dead to us now. It was just wood and stone and bad memories. We were leaving it to the ashes. We were walking out into the clean, cold air, and we were never looking back." The police lights outside were a strobing nightmare of blue and red, washing over the living room walls like a chaotic tide. The sirens had cut off, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake, broken only by the sound of heavy boots pounding up the driveway. Inside the house, the air smelled of fear and expensive perfume turning sour. Victoria was sobbing in the corner, a heap of defeat. Terrence was staring at his hands as if they didn't belong to him. Richard and Catherine looked like wax figures melting under the heat of exposure. But it was Althea who broke first. My wife of 40 years, the woman who sat in the front pew every Sunday singing hymns about redemption, crumbled. She didn't just sit down. She threw herself onto the floor. She crawled across the Persian rug, her knees shuffling over the broken glass, and spilled wine, ignoring the cuts, ignoring the ruin of her stockings. She crawled until she reached my boots, and then she wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face in the denim of my jeans. "Jeremiah," she wailed, her voice muffled and wet. "Jeremiah, please. You have to stop them. You have to tell them it was a mistake." I looked down at her. I felt nothing. No pity, no love. Just a cold, clinical detachment, like looking at a structure that had already burned to the foundation. "Get up, Althea," I said, my voice flat. "You are embarrassing yourself." She didn't let go. She squeezed tighter, her fingernails digging into my calves. "It wasn't me, Jeremiah," she pleaded, looking up at me. Her face was streaked with tears and snot, her eyes wild and desperate. It was her. It was Victoria. She is the serpent Jeremiah. She came into this house and whispered poison in my ear. She told me we had to do it. She told me it was the only way to save Terrence. She pointed a shaking hand at Victoria, who was too broken to even argue back. "The Bible says, a mother must protect her child," Althea rambled, her words tumbling out in a frantic stream. "I was just trying to protect our son. Victoria said we would lose everything. She said Zoe was a curse. She said God wanted us to be prosperous. I was confused, Jeremiah. The devil is a liar, and he used her to trick me. I listened to her twist the scripture. I listened to her blame a woman she had happily conspired with 5 minutes ago. She wasn't sorry for what she did to Zoe. She wasn't sorry for trying to kill me. She was sorry she got caught. She was using God as a shield to hide her own rot." "You crushed pills into my coffee, Althea," I said, pulling my leg away from her grip. "You watched me drink it. Was that Victoria's hand or yours? Was that the devil, or was that you deciding my life was worth less than a granite countertop?" I stepped back, leaving her clutching at empty air. "I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. "I just wanted you to sleep. I wanted peace, Jeremiah. I wanted us to be happy again, like we were before. Before that girl came, that girl, Zoe, even now on her knees begging for mercy. She couldn't say her name. She couldn't acknowledge the humanity of the child she tried to freeze to death. You talk about before I said walking over to the fireplace where a small fire was crackling. You talk about the past like it was pure, like Zoe was the stain that ruined it. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone again. But the rot didn't start with, "Victoria did it, Althea." It started a long time ago. It started with you. I tapped the screen. When I was in Terrence's room looking for the deed, I found something else. An old digital recorder tucked in the back of his safe. I don't know why he kept it. Maybe as insurance against you, maybe as a trophy. But I listened to it, Althea. And now everyone else is going to listen to it too. I turned the volume up to maximum. The recording was grainy, crackling with the static of 10 years passing. But the voices were unmistakable. It was a rainy night. I could hear the thunder in the background. "Please, Mrs. Brooks," a young woman's voice begged. It was soft, terrified. It was Maya, Zoe's mother. "I have nowhere to go. The shelter is full. The baby is sick. She has a fever." Then I heard Althea. Her voice wasn't the sweet, pious tone she used in church. It was cold, hard, and cruel. It was the voice of a gatekeeper. "That is not my problem," Althea said on the recording. "You should have thought about that before you laid down with my son. You are not coming in here. You are not bringing that bastard child into my house." "But Terrence loves me," Maya cried. "He said he would help." "Terrence does what I tell him to do," Althea snapped. "And I am telling you to leave. If you are still on my porch in 5 minutes, I am calling the police. I will tell them you are trespassing. I will tell them you tried to rob us. Get out. Get out and take that mistake with you." The recording ended with the sound of a heavy door slamming shut and the muffled sound of a girl sobbing in the rain. I looked at Althea. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the floor, her face pale as death. "Maya died that night," I said, my voice trembling with a rage that felt ancient. "Her car slid off the road 3 miles from here. They said it was an accident. They said she lost control in the storm. But she didn't lose control. She was driving blind because she was crying. She was driving terrified because you threw her out into a hurricane. Zoe was in that car, Althea. She was 2 years old. She survived in her car seat for 6 hours before they found her. 6 hours in the cold next to her dead mother." I looked at Zoe sitting in her wheelchair. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. She had never known why her mother died. She had never known that her grandmother was the architect of her orphanhood. "You killed her," I whispered. "You killed Maya. just as surely as if you had cut her brake lines. And 10 years later, you tried to do the same thing to her daughter. It isn't Victoria. It isn't the devil. It is you, Althea. It has always been you." Althea looked up at me. Her eyes were empty. There was no more pleading, no more scripture, just the blank stare of a woman who had been stripped naked and exposed to the world. "I did it for this family," she whispered. "I did it to keep us respectable." "Respectable?" I laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You are a murderer, Althea. You are a monster." I looked at my left hand. The gold band on my ring finger caught the light of the fire. I had worn it for 40 years. It had survived fires, floods, and fights. I thought it was a symbol of an unbreakable bond. Now I saw it for what it was, a shackle, a lie forged in gold. I grabbed the ring. It was tight on my finger, stubborn like the woman who gave it to me. I twisted it. I pulled. It slid over the knuckle, scraping the skin, leaving a raw red mark. I held it up. "You aren't my wife," I said, my voice steady and cold as the grave. "You aren't a mother. You aren't a grandmother. You are a stranger who has been living in my house, eating my food and poisoning my life." Althea reached out a hand. "Jeremiah, no. Don't. You don't deserve the name Brooks," I said. "You don't deserve the air you breathe." I turned to the fireplace. The flames were dancing hungry and bright. I threw the ring. It hit the back of the firebox with a ping and bounced into the heart of the coals. I watched it sit there for a second, a circle of gold in a sea of ash before the heat swallowed it. "We are done, Althea," I said, turning my back on her. The front door burst open. Police officers swarmed into the hallway, their weapons drawn, their voices shouting commands. "Police, get down! Everybody down!" I didn't get down. I stood tall. I stood like a commander in the middle of an inferno. I pointed at the people on the floor. The crying son, the hysterical daughter-in-law, the broken wife. "Take them," I said to the lead officer. "Take them all." Althea screamed as an officer grabbed her arm, hauling her up from the floor. It was a sound of pure primal loss, but I didn't look at her. I walked over to Zoe. I put my hand on her shoulder, shielding her from the chaos. "It is over, baby," I whispered. "The fire is out." But as I watched them cuff Althea, I knew the fire wasn't really out. It had just burned down everything that was rotten. Now we were standing in the ashes, and for the first time in a long time I could breathe. The air was smoky and bitter, but it was clean. It was the air of survival. The noise outside was deafening. It wasn't just sirens anymore, it was the roar of engines and the screech of tires on asphalt. The living room was bathed in a strobe light effect of blue and red that made everyone look like ghosts. Richard scrambled to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. His face went from pale to transparent. "It is a raid," he shouted, his voice cracking. "There are 20 cars out there." He reached for his phone, his hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. "I am calling Chief Miller. We play golf. He will stop this. He will tell his boys to stand down. This is a misunderstanding." I watched him dial. I watched him put the phone to his ear. I watched the hope drain out of his face when he realized no one was answering. "Chief Miller can't help you, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Those aren't local squads. Look at the markings. That is the state police. And the black SUVs behind them. That is the FBI. Your golf buddy doesn't have jurisdiction over federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit murder." The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. A battering ram hit the lock, and the heavy oak frame I had installed 20 years ago splintered like matchwood. "Federal agents, state police, hands in the air. Now, now, now." Tactical teams poured into the hallway. They moved with the precision of a wildfire jumping a fire break. Armored vests, assault rifles, helmets. They filled the room, sucking the oxygen out of the space. "Get on the ground!" Victoria screamed. It was a primal sound of pure terror. She dropped to her knees, her hands flying up. Terrence curled into a fetal ball near the fireplace, sobbing into the rug. Althea remained frozen on her knees where she had been begging me, staring at the men with guns as if they were demons sent to drag her to hell. I stood still, my hands raised calmly, showing my palms. I wasn't afraid. I was the one who lit the signal fire. A man in a suit walked in behind the tactical team. I recognized him. Agent Miller from the local FBI field office. I had sent him the files 30 minutes ago. He looked at the scene, the broken glass, the weeping family. The girl in the wheelchair. He looked at me and nodded. Secure the scene, he ordered. The room erupted into physical chaos. An officer grabbed Victoria's arm to cuff her. She fought him. She actually fought him. She scratched at his face, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. "Get your hands off me, you pig!" she shrieked, kicking and thrashing. "Do you know who I am? My father will have your badge. I am a victim here. That old man is the criminal. He hit my husband. He kidnapped that girl." The officer didn't argue. He spun her around, slamming her chest against the wall. He forced her hands behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was better than any music I had ever heard. Click, click, click. "You are hurting me," Victoria wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Daddy, do something. Help me!" But Daddy couldn't help her. Two agents were already hauling Richard and Catherine up from the sofa. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering," Agent Miller stated. "Catherine Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy and aiding and abetting." "What?" "No." "This is preposterous," Richard stammered, as the cuffs bit into his wrists. "We are here for dinner. We are innocent bystanders. You are on tape discussing a fraudulent land deal to cover up a federal crime," Jeremiah said, his voice low and dangerous. "And your financials. We have them, Richard. We know about the Ponzi scheme. We know about the investors you defrauded. It is over." Catherine started hyperventilating. "I can't go to jail," she gasped. "I have a heart condition. I need my pills." The agents ignored her, dragging them toward the door. They looked small now. Stripped of their arrogance, stripped of their pretense, they were just two old crooks in expensive clothes. Then they went for Terrence. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I taught to fish. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just wept. Snot and tears ran down his face, mixing with the blood from where I had slapped him. "Dad," he whimpered, looking up at me as the officer pulled him to his feet. "Dad, please. Don't let them take me. I am scared. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to fix things." I looked at him. I looked at the weakness that had defined his entire life. "You didn't want to fix things, Terrence," I said. "You wanted to erase them. You wanted to erase your daughter. You wanted to erase me." "Dad, I am your son," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "No," I said, turning away. "My son died a long time ago. You are just a man who tried to kill a child for a payout." The officer marched him out. As he passed Victoria, she spat at him. "This is your fault, you coward," she screamed. "You said he was senile. You said it would be easy." They dragged them out into the cold night, leaving only silence and the smell of ozone and fear. Agent Miller looked at Althea. She was still on the floor, trembling. "What about her?" the agent asked. I looked at my wife. There wasn't enough evidence to arrest her for attempted murder yet. The video showed her putting powder in my coffee, but her lawyer could argue it was just sleeping pills. The recording about Maya was old and inadmissible without corroboration. They needed to build a case. They needed toxicology reports. "Not tonight," I said. "But take a report. She is a person of interest in the abuse of the minor." The agent nodded. "Ma'am, you need to vacate the premises. This is a crime scene, and Mr. Brooks has requested you be removed from his property." Althea looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Vacate. But this is my house. I have nowhere to go." "Jeremiah, you can't do this. It is snowing. It isn't your house, Althea," I said, walking to the mantel and picking up a document I had placed there earlier. "I transferred the deed to the Zoe Brooks Trust 3 weeks ago before I went to Oregon." "You signed the quitclaim deed yourself, remember? You thought it was an insurance form for the car. You didn't even read it." Her jaw dropped. "You tricked me. I learned from the best I said. Get out, Althea." She stood up shakily. She smoothed her dress, trying to regain some shred of dignity. She looked at Zoe. "I hope you are happy, you little wretch," she hissed. "You destroyed this family." "Get out!" I roared, stepping toward her. She flinched and ran for the door. She didn't grab a coat. She didn't grab a purse. She just ran. I followed her to the threshold. I watched her stumble down the steps into the snow. The wind was whipping around the house, blowing ice crystals into her face. She stood in the driveway, shivering, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked back at the house. She looked at the warmth glowing in the windows. She looked at me. "Jeremiah, please," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "It is freezing." I held the door handle. I looked her in the eye. "You sent a 12-year-old girl into this cold without a coat, Althea. You said it would purify her." I started to close the door. "Let's see if it works for you." Jeremiah, wait. I slammed the door shut. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the wood, breathing hard. It was done. The house was empty. The cancer was cut out. I turned around. Zoe was watching me from her wheelchair. Her eyes were wide. "Is she gone, Papa?" she asked. "Yes, baby," I said, walking over and kneeling beside her. "They are all gone. Are they coming back?" "Never," I promised. "Not as long as I have breath in my body." I stood up and looked around the living room. It was a wreck. Broken glass, stained rugs, toppled furniture. It looked like a war zone, but it was quiet. For the first time in years, it was truly quiet. I picked up the phone. I had one more call to make. I needed a cleaning crew. I needed a realtor, and I needed plane tickets to Florida. "We aren't staying here, Zoe," I said. "This place, it has too many ghosts. We are going to find the sun." Zoe smiled, a real smile. "Okay, Papa, let's go." Selling the timberland was the final act of demolition in a life I was actively dismantling. I didn't sell it to a developer. I didn't sell it to Richard's cronies who tried to circle back like vultures even after the arrests. I sold it to the State Nature Conservancy for $5 million. It was a fraction of what a luxury resort developer might have paid in a decade, but it came with a clause that brought me more satisfaction than any check ever could. The land was designated as a protected wildlife corridor. No hotels, no condos, no greed, just trees growing tall and wild forever. I signed the papers in Dr. Montgomery's office, and when the pen lifted from the page, I felt the last weight of my old life fall away. That money went straight into a trust. It wasn't for me, it was for Zoe. It was the shield that would ensure no one could ever leverage her safety for cash again. The sentencing hearing 2 months later was a quiet affair. There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, but the room felt heavy with the ghosts of the past. Terrence and Victoria sat at the defense table. They didn't look like the power couple they had pretended to be. They looked like hollow shells. They were wearing orange jumpsuits that washed out their complexions. When the judge read the verdict guilty on all counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud, neither of them cried. They were past tears. They were in the shock of reality. 25 years. That was the sentence. 25 years without parole. By the time they got out, Zoe would be a grown woman with a life they couldn't touch. I watched them get led away in handcuffs. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel hate. I just felt the grim satisfaction of a fire line holding. The threat was contained. The danger was over. They were just ashes now blowing in the wind of the justice system. Althea didn't show up to the hearing. We heard later that she was living in a motel 2 towns over, cleaning rooms for minimum wage. She had lost her status. She had lost her church friends. She had lost the respectability she worshipped above God. She was living the life she had tried to condemn Maya to all those years ago. It was a poetic justice that didn't need my intervention. Gravity did the work for me. 3 weeks after the trial, I packed up the truck. I didn't take much. Just my clothes, some photos of Zoe, and my grilling tools. We left the snow behind. We drove south until the air turned heavy and sweet with humidity. We drove until the gray sky turned a brilliant, aching blue. We settled in a small coastal town in Florida where the only ice you see is in a glass of lemonade. Life here is different. It moves slower. The heat is a constant companion, but it is a kind heat. It warms the bones instead of freezing the blood. I bought a small bungalow near the water. It is nothing like the big house in the mountains. It is bright and airy with big windows that let the sun in. There are no dark corners here. There are no secrets hidden under floorboards. Zoe's recovery was slow, but she is a fighter. The doctor said she might have a limp for the rest of her life, but she worked at physical therapy with a determination that made me proud. Every morning we go to the beach. At first she needed the wheelchair, then crutches. Now she walks on her own. She walks with a slight hitch in her step, a rhythm that tells the story of her survival. I watch her walk along the water line, the waves lapping at her feet, and I thank God every day that I came home early. Today was a good day. It was Saturday, and that meant barbecue. I stood by the big steel smoker in the backyard, the smell of hickory and slow-cooked pork shoulder filling the air. This wasn't cooking. This was alchemy. It was fire and smoke and patience turning something tough into something tender. Zoe came out onto the patio. She was wearing shorts and a bright yellow t-shirt. Her scars were fading. Her cheeks were full and round again. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a kid. "Papa, is it ready yet?" she asked, peering at the temperature gauge. Patience. Little spark, I said, using the nickname I gave her. You can't rush the smoke. If you rush it, it gets bitter. You have to let the heat do the work. She leaned against me, resting her head on my arm. She was tall for her age, growing like a weed in the sunshine. Teach me, she said. So I did. I opened the firebox and showed her the coals. I showed her how to control the airflow, how to feed the fire just enough wood to keep it clean and blue, not thick and white. See that, I said, pointing to the vents. Fire wants to breathe. If you choke it, it dies. If you give it too much air, it burns everything down. You have to find the balance. You have to respect it. She nodded, her eyes serious and focused. She took the tongs and adjusted a log. She wasn't afraid of the heat. She respected it. We ate on the porch, watching the sun dip into the Gulf of Mexico, painting the water in shades of purple and gold. We ate with our fingers, the sauce sticky and sweet, the meat falling off the bone. We laughed about nothing. We talked about school. She wants to join the robotics club. She wants to learn to surf. She wants to live. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving a twilight glow, my phone buzzed on the table. I rarely used it anymore. Only Marcus had this number. I picked it up. It wasn't Marcus. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a local area code from back home. I opened the message. Jeremiah, please. I am sick. I can't afford my medicine. My hands hurt so bad I can't work. I am sleeping in my car tonight. Please just send me $100. For old time's sake. I pray for you every day. Althea. I stared at the screen. I read the words, but I didn't feel them. There was no pull, no guilt, no anger. It was like reading a message from a stranger who had the wrong number. She was praying for me. That was rich. She was praying to the same God she invoked when she tried to kill me. She was sleeping in her car, the car I probably paid for years ago. I looked at Zoe. She was wiping sauce off her chin, happy and full and safe. She was the only thing that mattered. I looked back at the phone. I didn't type a reply. I didn't block the number. That would require effort. That would imply she still had the power to annoy me. I stood up and walked to the edge of the deck. The ocean was dark now, the waves crashing gently against the pilings. What is it, Papa? Zoe asked. Nothing, baby, I said. Just spam, just noise. I wound up my arm. I am an old man, but I still have a good throwing arm. I hurled the phone out into the dark. It spun end over end, a small plastic brick flying through the night air. It hit the water with a quiet splash 50 yards out. It sank. It was gone. Salt water would do the rest. It would corrode the circuits, eat the memory, erase the message. I turned back to Zoe. She was looking at me with wide eyes, but she wasn't scared. She understood. She knew that some things needed to be thrown away so you could keep your hands free for what was important. Why did you do that? She asked. Because I don't need it anymore, I said, walking back to the table and sitting down opposite her. I have everything I need right here. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was warm. It was strong. Zoe, I said, looking her dead in the eye, I want you to remember something. I want you to remember it forever. What is it, Papa? Family isn't about whose blood you have in your veins. It isn't about who you look like. It isn't about a name on a birth certificate. I squeezed her hand. Family are the people who run into the fire for you. Family are the people who protect you when the world gets cold. Family are the people who never ever lock you out. She squeezed my hand back. I know, Papa, she whispered. You are my family. And you are mine, I said. The fireflies were coming out, dancing in the warm air. The smell of the ocean mixed with the smell of the barbecue smoke. It was a good smell. It was the smell of peace. I sat back in my chair and watched my daughter. The fire in the mountains was a lifetime ago. The fire in my old house was ashes. The only fire left was the one in the smoker, cooking our food, keeping us fed, keeping us together. And that fire I could control. That fire I would keep burning for the rest of my life. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves. The screen of my life faded to black, not in defeat, but in the quiet, comfortable darkness of a man who has finally finished his shift. I spent 40 years fighting wildfires, but the most dangerous flames were the ones burning inside my own home. I learned the hard way that blood does not make you family, loyalty does. Love does. My wife and son saw a paycheck where I saw a grandchild, and that betrayal cost them everything. Do not let the fear of being alone keep you trapped with people who drain your spirit. It is better to build a new home on honest ground than to live in a mansion built on lies. Protect the innocent, stand your ground, and remember real family are the ones who bring water to the fire, not the gasoline. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven them or did they get exactly what they deserved?